The ledger flagged her at the exact moment Oruvesh Tolith slid the sampling needle out of the girl's arm, and every panel in the reconstruction bay turned the color the Sethric reserved for things that were about to kill them. He had done this 10,000 times. A patient came in off a broken hull, half-frozen hairline fractures singing under the skin, and the ledger sorted them the way it sorted everyone: dosage class, sedation tolerance, tissue index, a clean amber verdict inside 4 heartbeats. It was the most boring machine on the waystation. It had never once been wrong, and it had never once been loud. It was loud now. "Recheck," Oruvesh said, because that was procedure, and because his second pair of hands had already started to shake. He kept the front pair flat on the tray, steady, the way an old reconstructor's hands were supposed to stay. "Draw again. Fresh column." The apprentice Toon, barely out of his second molt, membrane still pale at the edges, did not move. He was staring at the wall where the verdict hung in the air in letters as tall as his forearm. "Handling class, combat." "Reconstructor," Toon said. His voice had gone thin. "That's not a dosage class." "I can read." "That's not a the ledger doesn't have a combat class. Not for patients. That's the other registry. That's the one they use for." "I know what registry it is." Oruvesh set the spent needle in the sterilizer and did not let himself look at the girl yet. That was the trick of it, 40 years of the trick. You looked at the machine, you looked at the tray, you looked at the readout, and you gave the frightened part of your mind small tasks until it stopped being frightened. "Draw again." This time Toon drew again. The girl let him. That was the first strange thing, though Oruvesh only understood it as strange much later, when he had time to arrange the strangeness into an order. She simply turned her arm over on the rest, found the vein herself with 2 fingers, and held it up for the apprentice to take. She had a burn along her jaw and a gash above one eyebrow that had bled into her hair and dried there. Her lips were still gray from the cold of the wreck. She should have been shaking harder than Toon. She wasn't shaking at all. "You'll want the inside of the elbow," she said. "It's easier. I don't mind needles." Toon took the sample with his membranes fully retracted, the way the young ones did when they were trying not to be seen being afraid. The second column ran. 4 hearts, the old measure. Oruvesh counted them out of habit against the pulse in his own throat. The verdict came back the same. "Handling class, combat." "Confidence rising." "Confidence rising," Toon whispered. "It's never said that. It says a number and it stops. It doesn't rise." Down the corridor, somewhere past the sterile lock, a slow tone began. Not the shrill breach alarm. Oruvesh had heard that one twice in his life and hoped never to hear it again, but the lower, patient sound the waystation used when it had noticed something and wanted the right people to notice too. A summons dressed as a warning. It meant the ledger had not kept its verdict to itself. It had told the warden's office. It had told the overseer. It had, in its careful, bloodless way, raised its hand and pointed at the small, gray-lipped creature sitting on Oruvesh's table and said, "This one." Reconstructor Oruvesh. The intercom found him with the particular flatness of an official mouth. "This is Warden Kessal. The infirmary registry has posted a combat class handling flag out of your bay. Confirm the flag is a fault." Oruvesh looked at the readout. The confidence line was still climbing. "I can't confirm that," he said. A pause. On a well-run station, a pause from the warden's office was worth more than most words. "Say again." "I said I can't confirm it's a fault. The instrument has run the column twice. It is not drifting toward the flag. It is drifting further into it." He kept his voice in the register they taught first-year reconstructors, the one meant to slow a patient's heart by sounding like it had never once been surprised. "I have a single patient in the bay, unarmed, injured, recovered 40 minutes ago from a civilian hull loss. She is cooperating fully. Combat class organisms do not come in off civilian hull losses, reconstructor." "I'm aware of what the class implies." Oruvesh finally let himself look at the girl. She was watching him, not the way the injured watched him, not with the drowning animal want that most patients turned up at him like a second wound. She was watching him the way he watched the ledger, reading the verdict off his face, waiting to see the number and decide what it meant. "You've got a machine going off about me," she said. It wasn't a question. "What's it saying?" 40 years had given Oruvesh a rule about this, and the rule was that you did not lie to patient about the machine, because the machine was the one thing in the room they could not argue with and would eventually believe over you. "It's assigning you a handling class," he said. "The class it's chosen is one we normally reserve for engineered war organisms, species built for combat. It means the instrument has decided that your body will not respond to our medicine the way an ordinary patient's does. That you'll resist sedation. That you'll metabolize what we give you faster than we can dose it. That if we tried to treat you the way we treat everyone else, we would fail and you might die of the failure." He watched her take that in. He was braced for the part he hated, the fear, the bargaining, the "you're wrong, there's been a mistake, I'm nobody, I'm nothing, please." He had held 100 patients through that part. He knew every one of its turns. She did none of them. "Okay," the girl said, "so don't dose me like everyone else, dose me like the machine says." She tilted her head at the readout, and Oruvesh had the sudden, unwelcome sense that she could not read the Sethric script and was reading him instead and getting the whole thing anyway. "It's not the medicine I'm worried about. It's the tone in the hall. That tone means people are coming who aren't doctors. Am I right?" Tune made a small sound. Oruvesh did not answer, which was its own answer. "Right," the girl said, and settled back on the table as though she had all the time the galaxy could spare her. "Then let's get the arms sorted before they get here, so at least I'm not bleeding when the interesting part starts." Her name, the intake said, was Wren Halliday. 22 standard years. Occupation: growth systems technician, which the intake had rendered into Sethric as tender of the eating plants, and which Oruvesh understood to mean she kept alive the green machinery that fed a ship. She had been one of 9 crew aboard a mid-haul carrier called the Pharaoh's Patience when its aft ring failed in transit and folded the vessel around a fuel spine. The waystation's cutters had brought back 4 survivors. 3 of them were Sethric, and 1 of them was the human, and the 3 Sethric were all still under sedation in the recovery ward, breathing the slow, measured breaths of the properly medicated, while the human sat on his table and asked him about the tone in the hall. He had treated humans exactly twice before. Both times they had been dead when they reached him, and both times the ledger had rendered its verdict on their cooling bodies, and Oruvesh had assumed, in the incurious way one assumes things about a machine, that the flag was a quirk of dead human tissue. Corpses did strange things to instruments. He had noted it and moved on. He was not going to be able to note this and move on. "Tune," he said, "close the sample port, log both columns. Then step to the far wall and stay there, and whatever comes through that lock, you say nothing and you touch nothing." "Reconstructor. Firewall." The apprentice went. Oruvesh drew the seal wand along the gash above the girl's eyebrow, and the smart mesh went in and knit the wound shut, and she watched him do it with a flat professional interest, the way she might have watched someone repair a broken feed line. "That's good work," she said. "That's fast. You don't flinch." "You want me to?" "Most do." He moved to the burn on her jaw. Up close it was worse than it had looked, the skin gone to the shine that meant the deep layers had cooked, and it should have had her wide-eyed and begging for the block. She had not once mentioned it. "You have a burn on your face that I would not wish on a corpse, and you have not asked me for anything for the pain. Would asking make it come faster?" "No." "Then I'll ask when it'll do something." She held still while the mesh went over the burn. "The machine's still climbing, isn't it? I can see it on you. Every time you glance up your top hands go quiet." Oruvesh became aware that his top hands had, in fact, gone quiet. He put them back to work. "It's climbing," he said. "How high does it go?" I don't know, I've never watched it climb before. It's always just arrived, amber and done. He finished the burn. I don't know where the top of this is. Wren Halliday nodded slowly, as though he had confirmed something she'd already half decided. Then it's not measuring the medicine anymore, she said. You said the class was about how my body handles your drugs, but a drug question has a top. There's a most you can resist. If the machine can't find the top, it stopped asking how much medicine I can take. She looked at him with those flat, unhurried eyes. It's asking a different question, and it doesn't like the answer enough to stop. The stereo lock cycled. Oruvesh had time to think, in the last quiet half-second, that in 40 years no patient had ever explained his own instrument to him, while he was still trying to decide whether to be afraid of them. Then the lock opened, and the room filled with the warden's people, and there was no more quiet for a long time. Warden Kessal came in first, because Kessal was the kind of officer who believed a door was a thing you entered before your subordinates, so that the danger, if there was danger, spent itself on your armor and not theirs. It was the one thing Oruvesh had ever respected about him. Kessal was gelt, blue-black chitin plated in overlapping warrior caste segments, 4 walking limbs and 2 working ones, a head like a folded blade. His people had been soldiers for so many thousand years that peace sat on them like an ill-fitting coat, and Kessal wore it worse than most. He came through the lock with his working limbs open and empty, which was the Gelt way of saying, I have not yet decided to hurt you. And behind him came 4 of his wardens with restraint poles and a sedation rig on a float cart, and behind them, unhurried, came the overseer. The overseer's name was Prefect Salivar, and Salivar was everything the waystation's paperwork was made of. Slate purple, tall, robed in the layered gray of the administrative orders, with the long still face of a species that had governed other species for a very long time, and had learned to do it without ever seeming to raise its voice. Salivar did not look at the girl. Salivar looked at the readout, and then at Oruvesh, and let the silence do the first minute of the work. Reconstructor, the prefect said at last, explain the flag. There's nothing to explain that the instrument hasn't already posted. Oruvesh gestured at the wall with one hand and kept the other 3 near the tray. Patient presented off the Pharaoh's patients. I ran a standard intake column. The ledger returned a combat handling class and has been climbing in confidence through 2 subsequent draws. That is the entire event. I have a wounded technician on my table and an instrument that won't stop shouting about her blood. You've treated her. I've closed a facial burn and a scalp laceration. She has cracked ribs I haven't set and a wrist I haven't imaged because you arrived. Salivar's eyes moved, finally to Wren. It was a slow, complete look, the kind of look an appraiser gives a crate whose contents have been misdeclared. Oruvesh watched the prefect's face do the arithmetic that everyone did on first meeting a human. The small stature, the soft exterior, no shell, no plate, no claw, no visible weapon. A face that gave everything away, and then the arithmetic reaching the end of the visible evidence and finding it did not agree with the machine. And the machine winning, because the machine always won. Growth Systems Technician, Salivar read off the intake. You tend eating plants. I keep a ship's garden alive, Wren said. Yes. And before that? Before that I kept a smaller ship's garden alive. Before that I was in school learning how to keep ships' gardens alive. She held the prefect's gaze without any of the deference the gaze was built to collect. I've never held a weapon that wasn't a pruning blade, if that's the shape of the question. The instrument, Salivar said, disagrees with your account of yourself. The instrument doesn't have an account of me, Wren said. It has a reading. Those aren't the same thing. My whole life I've been the least dangerous person in every room I've walked into. If your machine is telling you different, then your machine isn't measuring what I've done. She glanced at the climbing confidence line she could not read. It's measuring what I'm made of. And I've got no more control over that than you do over what you're made of, Prefect. It was, Oruvesh thought, the most dangerous thing anyone had said in the room, and she had said it the way she'd told Toon where to find the vein. Kessal had not spoken. Kessal was doing the thing his caste did, which was to stand very still and read the room the way Oruvesh read the ledger. Not the words being said, but the distances between everyone, the angles, the number of steps between the girl and the lock, between the girl and the tray of instruments, between the girl and himself. Oruvesh saw the warden's head tilt a fraction, saw the working limbs settle a hair lower, and understood that Kessal had reached a conclusion the prefect hadn't yet. That if the machine was right, then the most dangerous thing in the room was not armored or armed. It was sitting on a medical table asking to have its ribs set. "Prefect," Kessal said, "I want her in the lower hold under a stasis field until we know what she is." "You want to freeze my patient," Oruvesh said. "I want to survive my shift, reconstructor." Kessal did not raise his voice. "Your instrument has assigned a class it has never assigned to a living thing on this station. That class exists because 200 years ago the medical registry stopped being able to sedate certain organisms without dying in the attempt, and someone decided it was better to have a word for those organisms than to keep finding out one dead orderly at a time. That's what combat class means. It doesn't mean she's a soldier. It means the ordinary tools that keep the rest of us safe from a patient don't work on her." He turned the folded blade of his head toward Ren, not unkindly. "I've read the class definition 100 times in training. I never thought I'd read it off a girl who tends plants." "So freeze me," Ren said. The room stopped. "I mean it," she went on into the silence. "If that's what makes your hands stop shaking, put me in the hold. I won't fight you. I've got 3 of my crewmates 2 rooms over full of your sedatives and breathing fine because your doctor here knew what he was doing. And I'd like them to keep breathing fine, which means I'd like this room calm, which means if calm costs me a stasis field, then that's a cheap thing and I'll pay it." She looked at Kessal. "But I want you to notice what just happened. You told me you were afraid of me, and I offered to make it easy for you. Combat class organisms don't do that, Warden. They make it hard. That's the whole point of the class." Kessal's working limbs went still, in a way Oruvesh had never seen them go still. "That's," the warden started. "That's the flaw in your machine," Ren said, "or it's the flaw in the word. One of the two, I don't know which yet. But I know that a thing built for combat doesn't volunteer for the box." She lay back down on the table and looked at the ceiling. "Set my ribs, doctor, then freeze me if you have to. I'll still be combat class when I thaw out, and you'll still have to figure out what that actually means. Freezing me just moves the problem to a colder room." The prefect studied her for a long moment. Then Salivar did the thing that administrators did when a situation refused to resolve into paperwork. It reached for a larger authority. "No stasis," Salivar said. "Not yet. If we freeze her and she is what the instrument says, we've imprisoned a citizen of a treaty species without cause, and the treaty offices will have my hide and yours, Warden. And if we freeze her and she's not what the instrument says, we've done it for nothing, and I've frozen a plant tender to death because a machine hiccuped." The prefect's eyes came back to Oruvesh. "I want certainty. You will run her through full diagnostics, every instrument this station carries. I want to know whether your ledger is broken or whether it is the only thing on this waystation currently telling the truth. You have until the next watch change." "That's 4 hours," Oruvesh said. "Then don't waste them explaining to me how few they are." Toon found his voice again once the prefect was gone, and only Kessal's 2 posted wardens remained, flanking the lock with their restraint poles grounded. The apprentice came off the far wall in a rush of pent breath. "Reconstructor, the full battery. Half those instruments are calibrated for Sethric physiology. The neural bath, the marrow reader, they'll throw errors on human tissue, Then we'll read the errors." Oruvesh was already pulling the deep scan cradle down from its housing. "The prefect wants certainty. We're going to give it every chance to tell us the ledger is wrong. Nothing would make me happier than to hand Salivar a broken instrument and send this girl to a recovery bed. So we run everything, and we run it honestly, Because if we shade a single reading to make ourselves comfortable and we're wrong, someone dies. He glanced at the girl. Possibly her, possibly us. Ren sat up on the table again. Where do you want me? The cradle reads deep tissue and marrow density. You lie in it, you stay still, it maps you. It won't hurt. It's calibrated for my people, so the numbers will come out strange even if you're the most ordinary creature in the galaxy. Try not to take the strange numbers personally. I never take numbers personally, Ren said, and climbed into the cradle and lay still. The cradle ran. Oruvesh had told her the numbers would come out strange, and he had believed it, and he had meant it as a comfort, a way of saying the machine, and you are speaking different languages, don't be frightened by the noise. He had not expected the noise to organize itself into something worse than a signal. Marrow density came back at the top of the instrument's scale, and then a notation he had to look up. Over range, instrument saturated. The cradle could not find the top of her bone. Muscle attachment mapped in bands so dense the reader rendered them as solids and asked, in its patient machine way, whether the sample was tissue or worked metal. The healing markers, the standing garrison of repair agents that every living body keeps against the day it is wounded, came back at a concentration the cradle flagged as post-trauma acute, except she was not in acute trauma. She was lying still with her hands folded. Her body was simply always at that readiness. It kept a war footing the way Oruvesh's kept a resting heartbeat. Toon, he said quietly, come and read this. Tell me I've made an error. The apprentice came and read it. His membranes had gone all the way pale. You haven't made an error, Toon said. Reconstructor, this, the marrow, the repair concentration. If I saw these on a Sethric patient, I'd say the patient had been engineered. I'd say someone had gone into them before birth and rebuilt them to survive things a body shouldn't survive. I'd file it as unlicensed augmentation and call the wardens. He looked at the girl, small in the cradle, eyes closed, breathing slow. But there's no augment signature, no scarring in the code, no graft margins. It's not built. It's just grown. This is what her people are when nobody does anything to them at all. This is baseline, Oruvesh said. This is baseline, Toon agreed, and the two words sat in the room like a diagnosis. In the cradle, without opening her eyes, Ren spoke. You've gone quiet again, she said. Both of you this time, so it's not the medicine and it's not a hiccup. What did it find? Oruvesh weighed the rule about not lying to a patient against the 4 hours he had left and the two wardens at the lock, and the rule won, because it always won. It found that your body maintains itself in a state my people only reach when we are dying and fighting not to, he said. The instruments that scan for engineering can't tell whether someone built you this way because there's no seam. You were simply born at the readiness we associate with a weapon that's been switched on. He set his front hands on the cradle's edge. The ledger isn't broken, Ren. I was hoping it was. It isn't. She opened her eyes. No, she said. I didn't think it was. And then, because she had been watching him the whole time the way he watched the machine, you wanted it to be. That's a decent thing, Doctor. Wanting the machine to be wrong so the small hurt creature on your table can just be small and hurt. Hold on to that. You're going to need it when the rest of them stop wanting the same thing. Word of the flag had gotten out of the bay the way all things got out on a waystation, not through the official channels, which were slow and discreet, but through the human channel of somebody told somebody, which was fast and merciless. By the time Oruvesh had finished the neural bath and the reflex battery, there were faces at the observation gallery above the bay. Off-shift crew, a cluster of dock hands. 2 of the station's own medics who had no business there and had found business anyway. They pressed against the gallery glass and looked down at the girl in the cradle, the way sober people look at something they have only ever heard described in stories meant to frighten children. Because that was what she was to most of them. Oruvesh understood it the way you understand a thing you've known so long you've stopped hearing it. Every species in the treaty had a version of the story. The world at the far end of the sky where the animals fought the weather and the weather fought back, where the food had teeth and the teeth had ambitions, where the dominant creature had climbed to the top of a food chain so vicious that reaching the top had required becoming the most patient, most enduring, most quietly lethal thing the world could produce. And then, having become it, had looked up at the stars and decided to go be neighbors. The Sethric told the story to frighten hatchlings into caution. The Gelt, Oruvesh suspected, told it to frighten themselves into respect. Everyone knew the story. Almost no one had met the punchline. They were meeting it now. It was lying in a diagnostic cradle with a burned jaw, 22 years old, worried about its friends. "They're staring," Wren observed. She hadn't looked up, she didn't need to. "How many?" "A dozen more coming. They're not going to like the readings any better than you did." "No. And your prefect's going to have to decide what to do about a girl who tests as a weapon and acts like a patient." She flexed her bandaged wrist, testing it. "That's a hard decision. Harder than freezing me, which is why he didn't. Freezing me would have been easy and wrong, and he was smart enough to see the wrong part. But easy comes back around, Doctor. Give a frightened room enough hours, and easy always comes back around dressed as sensible." She finally turned her head, found him among his instruments. "How long till the prefect comes back?" 3 hours now." "Then we've got 3 hours to turn a reading into an understanding," Wren said. "Because a reading gets a person frozen. An understanding might get one of us out of this room without a body count." She lay back. "Run your next machine, Doctor, and this time tell me what it's asking before it asks. I'd like to answer it well." Toon had joined the Reconstruction Corps to get away from exactly this. He had grown up on a listening world, a quiet Sethric moon where the loudest thing that ever happened was the tide bells, and he had chosen medicine because medicine was the one field where you were rewarded for making the frightening things smaller. A wound was frightening. You closed it. A fever was frightening. You broke it. Every day of his training had been the same promise repeated. The terrible thing arrives, and you, with your steady hands and your good instruments, make it ordinary. He had believed that promise the way children believe the things that let them sleep. Standing at the far wall of the bay, watching a machine fail to find the top of a girl, he understood for the first time that the promise had an edge to it, and that he had reached the edge. Because the terrible thing had arrived, and every instrument he trusted had looked at it and gotten louder, the ledger had not made her ordinary. It had made her enormous. And the worst of it, the thing that was going to keep Toon awake for the rest of his molts, was that the terrible thing kept turning its head and speaking to him gently. It had told him where the vein was. It had asked him not to be afraid in the specific, practiced way of someone who had spent a life being the thing people were afraid of, and had learned to manage it out of kindness. "You keep looking at me like I'm going to move fast," Wren said. She was out of the cradle now, sitting on its edge while Oruvesh prepped the last of the batteries. She'd said it to the room, but Toon knew it was for him. "I'm not going to move fast. I've been trying not to move fast since I got here." "I'm sorry," Toon said before he could stop himself. "I'm the readings. I've never—" "I know," she said it kindly. "Can I tell you something that might help? The readings are true, every one of them. I'm not going to insult you by pretending your machines are broken. But there's a thing the machines can't put on the wall, and it's the most important thing about all this, and it's this." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, small and burned and perfectly calm. "Everything your instruments are measuring is the part of me that's for staying alive, not for killing, for not dying. The dense bones so a fall doesn't finish me, the blood that clots before I bleed out, the muscle that holds when the world tries to tear me off it. My whole body is a machine for refusing to die. That's what your ledger smelled, and it didn't have a gentle word for it, so it used the frightening one." She spread her hands. "Combat's just what refusing to die looks like from the outside, if the thing trying to kill you happens to be a person. But it's the same machinery either way. I'd use it on a hull breach the exact same as I'd use it on your warden, and I'd much rather use it on a hull breach." Toon stared at her. That's the class definition doesn't say that. The class definition was written by people who only ever met my kind on a battlefield, Ren said. So the only face they ever saw was the fighting one. You can't blame a word for the company it kept. She straightened. But you've got a chance the definition writers never had. You've got me on a table, not in a trench. You get to write down what refusing to die looks like when nobody's shooting at it. That's a better data set than the one your class is built on. If your doctor's smart, and he's smart, that's what these next 3 hours are actually for. Oruvesh had gone still at his instruments. Toon saw the old reconstructor's top hands hover over the battery controls, saw him turn the girl's words over the way he turned over a difficult diagnosis. You're telling me, Oruvesh said slowly, to reclassify you. I'm telling you your machine only knows one of my faces, Ren said. I'm telling you the flag isn't wrong, it's just thin. It's a true thing with most of the truth cut off. And I'm telling you that a thin true thing, handed to a frightened prefect, is going to get somebody hurt, because he'll act on the whole word combat when only a sliver of it applies to a girl who came here off a wrecked garden ship. She looked between them. You've got the instruments to widen it, so widen it. Measure the part of me that's for surviving, not the part that's for fighting, and put that on the wall next to the flag. Give the prefect the whole animal, not just its teeth. Warden Kessal was not in the bay to hear that speech, and afterward he was sorry he'd missed it, because it would have saved him the next 2 hours. He was in the lower hold, standing over the thing the waystation did not put in its brochures. The hold held a stasis vault, and the stasis vault held a specimen, and the specimen was a genuine combat-class organism. Not a flag on a screen, but the article itself, recovered 8 years back from a dead battlefield in the Saran Drift, and kept here because no one had ever agreed on where else to keep it. It floated in the amber suspension of a first-rate stasis field, 4 meters of engineered muscle and grown blade, a war form that some long-collapsed regime had built to take ground and hold it and feel nothing about either. It had been switched off when they found it, its makers dead, its war over, its purpose orphaned, and the treaty's medical ethics offices had spent 8 years arguing about whether switching it off had been mercy or murder. And while they argued, it hung in the vault and cost the station a small fortune in field power, and gave everyone who stood watch over it bad dreams. Kessal stood watch over it now, because he wanted to remember what the word meant before he decided what to do about the girl. This was combat class. This grown horror with the blades where its forearms should have been. This was what the registry had been written to describe, a thing that would not stop, could not be reasoned with, would metabolize your sedatives like water and open your throat while it did it. The class existed because of things like this, and the same word, the exact same word, was now hanging on a wall 2 decks up over a girl who had offered to climb into a freezer to make him comfortable. The 2 facts would not fit in Kessal's head at the same time. He had spent his whole life in the certainty that danger looked like danger, that the treaty was safe, because the dangerous things were shaped like the specimen in the vault, huge and bladed and obvious, and you could see them coming and post a guard. That certainty was the floor he stood on, and the girl upstairs had put a crack in it just by being small and calm and reading the same number he read and coming to a steadier conclusion about it than he had. Warden, his second, a young gelt named Orsk, came down the ramp. The prefect's asking for a threat assessment ahead of the reconvene. He wants to know what she can do. Kessal looked at the specimen in the amber field. Tell the prefect that's the wrong question, he said. Warden. He's asking what she can do. Everyone's asking what she can do. We've spent 3 hours measuring what she can do. Kessal turned from the vault. The instruments already answered it. She can do more than any of us. Her bones don't break, her blood doesn't run out, she doesn't feel the pain that would stop the rest of us, and if she decided to take this station apart with her hands, we would sedate her and the sedative would fail, and then it would be very bad for a while. He started up the ramp. That's what she can do. It's settled. It's been settled since the second column. Then what's the right question? What she will do, Kessel said, which no machine on this station can measure, which we've spent 0 of our 3 hours on, because it's the only question that's actually frightening, and frightened people run toward the questions they can answer. He paused at the top of the ramp and looked back once at the 4 meters of orphaned war floating in its amber sleep. She offered to get in the box, Orsk. I keep coming back to it. That thing down there would never offer to get in the box. It doesn't have the part of it that offers, and she led with it. He shook the folded blade of his head slowly. The ledger measured everything about her except the one thing that makes her different from that, and that one thing is the whole story. Oruvesh did what the girl asked. He widened the flag. It went against 40 years of habit. You did not editorialize on a machine's verdict. You did not decorate a reading with your hopes. But she was right that the flag was thin. And she was right that a thin, true thing was the most dangerous kind. And so he built her the wider picture the honest way, out of the instruments themselves. He ran the endurance battery and logged how long her tissue held function under load, and it held past every threshold the instrument owned. He ran the toxin clearance panel and watched her body scrub compounds that would have stopped his own heart, scrub them calmly, as background work, the way a ship scrubs its own air. He ran the reflex arc and measured the gap between a thing happening to her and her body answering it. And the gap was so short the instrument asked him to confirm the sensor hadn't triggered on its own. Every number was a horror if you read it as a weapon. Every number was a marvel if you read it as a will to live. They were the same numbers. That was the thing he could not get past, that the terror and the marvel were not 2 readings but 1 reading, seen from 2 sides, and which side you stood on was not a fact about her. It was a fact about you. He wrote it all into the widened profile. And at the bottom, against every instinct of a career spent letting machines speak for themselves, he wrote a reconstructor's note in his own hand, because the girl had earned an honest witness, and the prefect was going to need one. The subject tests combat class on every axis the registry measures. The registry measures capacity. It does not measure use. In 4 hours of full battery diagnostics, the subject has volunteered for stasis, directed care toward her injured crewmates, corrected my instruments where I erred, and at no point moved faster than necessary or raised a hand. I have treated the dying of 9 species. I have never treated a patient more capable of harm or less inclined to it. If the station acts on the flag alone, it will be acting on a true fact stripped of the truest one. O.V. Talleth, Chief Reconstructor. He was still looking at what he'd written when the lights browned out for the first time. It was small. A flicker, a dimming, the readouts stuttering and catching themselves. On most stations it would have meant nothing, a load imbalance, a generation ring shedding a spike. Oruvesh had lived on this waystation for 11 years, and he had felt that flicker exactly never, because the waystation's power was the one thing it did perfectly. It fed the docks and the wards and the sterile locks and the recovery ovens, and 4 decks down, the enormous steady draw of a first-rate stasis field wrapped around 4 meters of sleeping war. The lights came back. Oruvesh looked up at them. Across the bay, Wren Halliday had gone very still on the edge of the cradle, not the calm stillness she'd worn all afternoon, but a different one, sharper, her head slightly cocked. The whole small, burned length of her suddenly listening to the station, the way Kessel listened to a room. "Doctor," she said, "what draws the most power on this station?" And Oruvesh, who had just spent 3 hours learning to trust that this girl reached true conclusions faster than his instruments, felt the floor of the afternoon drop out from under him. "The stasis vault," Oruvesh said. His voice came out of him flat and far away. 4 decks down. The station holds a specimen, a recovered war form. It's kept asleep in a first-rate field, and the field is the single largest draw on our grid. Wren was already off the cradle and on her feet. She hadn't hurried. She'd simply stopped being seated between one word and the next, the way a thing that refuses to die shifts states without visible effort. A war form, she said. Asleep. In a box. Combat class. The genuine article, Oruvesh said. The word was written for it. The lights browned a second time, and this time they stayed low for a breath too long, and when they came back the tone in the corridor had changed. The patient's summons was gone. In its place was the sound Oruvesh had heard twice in his life and prayed never to hear again, the shrill stacked note of a real emergency, the breach alarm, climbing the decks toward them. Tune made a sound. The two posted wardens at the lock straightened, restraint poles forgotten, heads turning toward the corridor and the alarm, and the thing their whole caste was built to run toward and had never once wanted to. That's the field failing, Wren said. She said it the way Oruvesh had said the ledger isn't broken, not a guess, a reading. A draw that big doesn't flicker for a load spike. It flickers when something's pulling against it. Your specimen's waking up, and every time it surges the field it browns your grid. She turned to Oruvesh, and for the first time all afternoon there was something urgent in the flat calm of her, though the calm did not break, it sharpened, focused, became a tool. How good is that field? First rate, the best the treaty makes. First rate against what it was built to hold. Oruvesh opened his mouth to say yes and found he couldn't, because he understood the shape of her question now, and the shape of it was terrible. The field was first-rate against a sleeping specimen. It had been designed and powered and maintained for 8 years against a thing that was switched off. No one had ever asked it to hold a war form that was switching itself back on. No one had known a war form could. I don't know, he said. It was built to keep something asleep, not to cage something awake. Then it won't hold, Wren said simply. Things built to keep the dangerous thing asleep never hold once it wakes up. That's a rule, Doctor. It's true on ships and it's true on stations, and I'd bet it's true everywhere there's a box and a thing that shouldn't be in it. She looked at the lock. How many people between that vault and the wards where my crew are sleeping? The intercom answered before Oruvesh could. It answered in Kessal's voice, and Kessal's voice had lost every gram of the careful officer flatness it had carried into the bay 2 hours ago. All stations, this is the warden. We have a stasis failure in the lower hold. The specimen is, a sound behind his words, a deep structural groan that no living throat had made. The specimen is active. I say again, the Saron war form is active and the field is degrading. All non-security personnel move up station and seal behind you. Medical, secure your wards. This is not a drill. Wardens to me. The channel cut. For a moment the bay held a perfect silence, the kind that comes after a sentence that has rearranged the future. Toon stood frozen against the far wall. The two posted wardens looked at each other and then, to their credit, turned toward the corridor and the alarm, because that was the job, even when the job was walking toward a thing that had been built to end their entire caste and had had 8 years of sleep to be angry about it. And Wren Halliday walked to the tray of surgical instruments, looked at it for exactly 1 second, and did not take anything. Doctor, she said, where are my crewmates? Recovery ward, 2 decks up, sealed. Oruvesh's mind was moving now, catching up, and it snagged on what her hand had done, reached for the tray, appraised the blades, and declined them. You didn't take a weapon. A knife's no good against 4 meters of grown armor, Wren said. I'd just be a girl with a knife, and then I'd be a dead girl with a knife, and my crew would still be 2 decks up. She was already at the lock, palm flat on the panel, the burned side of her face lit blue by the alarm strip. You measured me all afternoon, Doctor. You know what I am better than I do, you've got it on the wall in numbers. So you tell me. The thing down there is switching on. Your warden's people are made of the same stuff my crewmates are. They break, they bleed out, they feel the pain that stops a body. That's your whole cast of guards walking toward a thing that eats guards for a purpose. She looked back at him. Who on this station is built to walk toward that and not stop? Oruvesh looked at the reading still glowing on his wall. The marrow that saturated the instrument, the blood that clotted before it ran, the reflex arc so short the sensor doubted itself, the muscle the reader had asked him to confirm wasn't worked metal. "You," he said. It came out of him quietly, and it cost him, because he was a reconstructor, and he had spent his life keeping the frightening thing from the fragile one. And he understood in the saying of it that he was about to do the reverse, that he was about to point the fragile-looking thing at the frightening one because she was, in the terrible arithmetic of the afternoon, the only shield the station had. "You're built to walk toward it." "I'm built to walk toward it and come back," Wren corrected. "The coming back part is the whole point of the machinery your ledger got scared of. So I'm going to go do the thing my body is for, and I need you to do two things while I'm gone." "Name them." "Get your apprentice and your 2 guards up station with everyone else. They're brave, and brave's going to get them killed against that thing, and dead brave people don't help anybody." She hit the lock and it cycled open onto the shrill red corridor. "And Doctor," she paused in the opening, small against the alarm light, and for 1 second the flat comm gave way to something Oruvesh would spend a long time trying to name, something that was neither fear nor courage but older than both, the plain readiness of a thing that had been made to survive and was about to find out how much survival it had in it. "Keep my crew breathing. That's the job I actually came here with. Everything else today is just the job I got handed." Then she was gone into the red, moving down the corridor toward the alarm, not fast, never fast, just steady and certain and unhurried in a way that was somehow worse than running. Toon found his voice. "Reconstructor, we can't just, she's a patient. We can't send a patient at that thing. That's the definition of." "I know exactly what it's the definition of." Oruvesh was already pulling the emergency medical kit from its housing, his front hands steady out of 40 years of habit and his back hands not steady at all. "It's the definition of the word on the wall, and I spent all afternoon writing a note about how the word didn't apply to her." He shouldered the kit. "It applies. Every letter of it applies. I just had it aimed the wrong way. Get the guards, get up station. Move Toon." "Where are you going?" Oruvesh looked at the red corridor, where the girl had disappeared. "After her," he said. "She told me to keep her crew breathing. She's about to be on that list. I'm not going to watch the only patient I couldn't classify go do the classifying alone." Kessal met the war form on the ramp of the lower hold, and he learned in the first 4 seconds everything the girl had learned about herself in an afternoon of machines. He learned that his caste certainty, that danger looked like danger, that you could see it coming and post a guard, was worth exactly nothing here, because he had seen this danger coming for 8 years and posted a guard the whole time, and it had made no difference at all. The field had held right up until it didn't, and then it hadn't, and now the thing was out, and all the seeing it coming in the world had only bought him a front row seat. He learned that the training was wrong, not the marksmanship, not the discipline those held, but the training assumed an enemy that could be stopped by the things that stopped an enemy. Overwhelming fire, choke points, the sheer weight of a caste bred for exactly this. He put all of it into the war form on the ramp, everything 2 decks of wardens could bring, and the war form walked through it the way weather walks through a fence. His people's fire found it and marked it and did not slow it. The choke point he'd chosen funneled it toward him exactly as the manuals promised, and the manuals had never mentioned what to do once the funnel delivered the thing to your throat. He lost Orsk on the ramp. He lost 2 more at the hold door. And he learned the last thing, the thing that broke the floor he'd stood on his whole life, that his caste, the soldiers, the ones the treaty kept precisely so that the fragile species would never have to meet a thing like this. His caste was fragile too. Against the genuine article they broke like everyone broke. They bled out like everyone bled out. The Gelt had spent 10,000 years being the answer to the question who walks toward the monster, and here was the monster the answer didn't work on, and Kessal, falling back with what was left of his wardens, dragging a wounded second by her working limb, understood that his whole people had been a kind of comforting story too. A story the treaty told itself so it could sleep. We have soldiers. The soldiers will hold. The soldiers were not going to hold. He got the survivors through the hold's blast door and hit the seal, and the door came down. And through the closing gap, he saw the war form turn its bladed head toward the sound of the mechanism, unhurried, and begin to walk toward the door that was going to slow it down by perhaps a minute. "It's coming up," Kessel said into the channel, and his voice was a thing he didn't recognize. "The blast door won't hold it. Nothing we have holds it. Get everyone above the third seal and pray the third seal is thicker than the—" He stopped, because coming down the red corridor toward him, toward the blast door and the thing behind it, walking with the plain, unhurried steadiness of someone headed to a shift, was the girl, the plant tender, the combat class flag made flesh. She had a burned jaw and a bandaged wrist and no weapon in either hand, and she looked at Kessel and his broken wardens the way a relief shift looks at the crew it's come to replace. "Warden," Wren said, "how many did you lose?" Kessel could not answer for a moment. Then, because she had asked it plainly and it deserved a plain answer, 3, maybe 4. "How many are still down there, behind that door?" "None living. It's just the specimen now." Wren nodded slowly, and something in her face settled, the last calculation clicking closed. "Then everyone who's going to be behind that door with it," she said, "is me." Prefect Salivar had governed for 140 years without once raising a hand or a voice, and had always considered this a moral achievement. Standing on the waystation's command deck, watching the lower hold telemetry go the color of ruin, the prefect began to understand that it had never been a moral achievement at all. It had been a luxury. It had been the luxury of governing places where danger looked like danger and could be met with paperwork, forms filed early enough that the raising of hands could be left to others, to the wardens, to the soldier castes, to the story the treaty told itself about who would hold the line so that administrators could stay clean. The wardens had not held the line. The telemetry said so in the plainest terms Salivar had ever read. The warden's whole force committed and the specimen's position marker still climbing, deck by deck, toward the wards, toward the docks, toward the 10,000 souls the waystation was charged with keeping. "Options," Salivar said. The deck officer, a cephalopod named Yult, gray and mottled and normally unflappable, answered with the modeling gone dark with stress. "The blast doors will slow it, not stop it. Warden's estimate is it clears the third seal within the hour, and there's nothing structural above the third seal that it can't open." "Weapons on the station." "Docking defenses face outward, Prefect. There's nothing rated to engage a target inside the hull. The warden's arms are the heaviest thing we have, and the warden's arms didn't slow it." Yult's tendrils moved over the board. "There is one option that stops it with certainty." "Say it." "We vent the lower decks, blow the emergency locks below the third seal, and open the whole lower third of the station to vacuum." "Nothing survives explosive decompression, Prefect. Not even the specimen. Its makers built it to survive a battlefield. They didn't build it to survive having no battlefield to stand on." Yult's dark modeling pulsed. "The field power's already failing. If we're going to do it, we do it before it clears the third seal, because above the third seal we start venting the wards." Salivar looked at the deck map. The lower third of the station glowed with the amber of occupied compartments the emergency system had not yet been able to clear. Maintenance crews caught below the seals. The wardens wounded, dragged as far as they could be dragged and no farther. And a single fast-moving marker, unarmored, unhurried, that the system had tagged with the flag Salivar had spent the afternoon arguing about handling class. Combat descending against the tide of everyone else, walking down toward the specimen while the whole station ran up. "The human's in the vent zone," Salivar said. "The human walked into the vent zone, Prefect, after being told to move up station." Yult hesitated. With respect, she's flagged the same class as the thing that's killing us. We spent the afternoon afraid of what she is. Now there's a chance the problem solves itself. If we vent, we lose the specimen and the flagged human in the same breath, and the station's two combat class problems both end at once. It was, Salivar reflected, exactly the kind of clean administrative logic that 140 years of never raising a hand had trained the prefect to find beautiful. Two problems, one action, no hand raised, the vent did the raising, the vacuum did the killing, and the paperwork afterward would say containment failure, casualties regrettable, no officer at fault. Easy. The girl had used that word. Give a frightened room enough hours, and easy always comes back around dressed as sensible. How long can the maintenance crews below the seal survive if we don't vent? Salivar asked. Until the specimen reaches them, minutes. Fewer. And if we vent, we kill them ourselves minutes sooner to be certain of the specimen. Yes, Prefect. Salivar was quiet for a moment. On the deck's secondary screen, a channel had been left open from the reconstruction bay, the old Surgeon Tolith's channel, still keyed, forgotten in the rush. And through it Salivar could hear faintly the sound of that steady girl's voice somewhere down in the red, saying something to the warden that the deck's pickups couldn't quite resolve. Salivar had spent the afternoon being handed that girl's readings and had not once heard her voice do anything but stay level. It was level now, 4 decks down, walking toward the thing the wardens couldn't stop. Hold the vent, Salivar said. Yult's modeling flickered. Prefect. I said hold it. Salivar straightened the gray robes, an old administrative reflex, dressing for a decision. Charge the emergency locks, arm them, have your hand on them. If the specimen clears the third seal, you vent on my word and you don't wait for me to finish saying it. I would rather lose the lower third than the whole. That is the sensible thing, and I'll sign it. The prefect looked at the descending marker. But we do not vent while there is a chance the crews below can be reached. And we do not vent to solve the problem of a girl who walked down there to reach them. I spent this afternoon nearly freezing her to be comfortable. I will not spend this evening venting her to be certain. If she is what the instrument says, then she is currently the only thing on this station moving in the right direction, and I will not murder my one asset to feel safe. A pause. Note that in the log, Yult, in those words. If I'm wrong, I want it clear it was mine. 2 decks up, in the sealed recovery ward, Toon sat with the 3 sleeping Sethric off the Pharaoh's patients, and did the only thing left to him, which was the job the girl had named. Keep my crew breathing. He had gotten the 2 posted wardens up station. He had not gone up himself. He had told himself it was because the recovery ward was his post, and someone had to hold it. And that was true. But under the true reason was the other one, the one he was not proud of and could not shake. That the girl had walked down into the red without a weapon or a hope, and Toon could not make his body follow her, but he could not quite make it flee her either. And staying with her sleeping crewmates was the closest his courage could come to standing where she stood. So he stayed and he watched the 3 slow breaths, and he kept them slow. When the decompression alarm on the deck below made one of them stir toward waking, toward panic, toward pulling the lines, toward the thrashing that would tear the careful work Oruvesh had done, Toon leaned in and did what a reconstructor did, which was to make the frightening thing smaller. He adjusted the drip. He steadied the line. He put one of his cool Sethric hands on the human's forehead, the way he'd seen Oruvesh do it 1,000 times, and he was surprised to find that even asleep, even sedated, the human's body carried the same quality the girl's had carried in the cradle, a density, a heat, a sense of enormous machinery idling low. These were plant tenders, cargo crew. The least dangerous people on their ship, the girl had said of herself, and Toon believed it, and it made the readings worse, not better. Because if these were the harmless ones... The station shuddered. Somewhere below, a blast door took a blow and rang like a struck bell. The human under Toon's hand stirred again, and this time surfaced, eyes opening, unfocused, swimming up through the sedation. A young man, older than the girl by a few years, with the same close-worn look of someone who worked with his hands. "Where's Ren?" he said. It was the first thing out of him before "where am I?" before what happened, before the pain could even reach him. "There were 9 of us. Where's Ren?" Toon found he could not lie to this one either. It seemed to run in the species. "She's below," he said. The station has an emergency. A dangerous specimen has gotten loose. Your friend went down to it." The young man closed his eyes, not in grief, in something more like confirmation. "Of course she did," he said. "She's the one who goes down." He tried to sit up, failed, his sedated body refusing the order, and lay back breathing hard. "You've got a machine somewhere," he said. "A medical scanner. It scanned her, didn't it, when they brought her in?" Toon went still. "How do you know that?" "Because everybody's got a machine and every machine goes off," the young man said, eyes still closed, voice thick with the drugs. "Happens everywhere we go. Some alien doctor scans one of us and the machine screams and the whole station locks down and points at whichever of us it caught. And every single time, the doctor stands there deciding whether we're a monster." He turned his head toward Toon, and even drowning in sedative his eyes had the plain steadiness the girl's had, the family resemblance of a whole species. "You want to know what she is. You've got the reading and you can't make it fit her face. That's why you're sitting here with your hand on my head, instead of running up station with the rest." "Yes," Toon admitted. "Then I'll save you the 4 hours your machine's going to take." The young man let his eyes fall shut. "She's the one who goes down. That's all the reading means. When the worst thing in the world wakes up and starts climbing toward everybody, she's the one who walks the other way down toward it, so the rest of us get to keep climbing up. Your machine measured the part of her that lets her survive going down there." His voice was fading back into the sedation. "It just didn't measure the part that makes her go. No machine does. We don't have a class for it either. We just call it her name." Oruvesh caught up to her at the blast door, and she did not seem surprised to see him. "You should be up station," Ren said. She was standing a careful distance from the door, head tilted, listening to the deep uneven sounds the warform made on the other side of it, the groan of a thing testing a barrier, the ring of blade on plate, and under those a low continuous note that Oruvesh realized after a moment was not the door at all. It was the specimen. It was making a sound. "You've got no business down here, Doctor. You're built like my crewmates. Soft. Breakable. You come apart if that thing so much as looks at you hard." "I have a medical kit and 40 years of using it," Oruvesh said. "If you're going to do whatever you're about to do, you're going to get hurt doing it, and when you do, someone has to be down here who can keep you from bleeding out. You told me you're built to walk toward it and come back. The coming back part is a medical event. I'm the medicine." He set the kit down where he could reach it. "That's my business. That's the only business I've ever had." Ren looked at him for a moment, and something moved across her burned face that might, on a less guarded person, have been gratitude. "All right," she said. "Then you're the field station. You stay here at this door and you don't come past it no matter what you hear. If I need you, I'll bring the work to you. Understood?" "What are you going to do?" "Depends what it is when it comes through." She nodded at the door. "Right now I don't know what I'm dealing with. I know it's combat class, and I know it went through your warden's people like they weren't there, and I know your instruments couldn't find the top of me, so maybe we're made of the same refusing to die, that thing and me, and maybe I'm the only one on this station it can't just walk through." She rolled her bandaged wrist, testing it, absorbing the pain without a flicker. "But maybe not. Maybe it's better than me. It was built on purpose. I just grew. So before I bet anyone's life on beating it, I have to find out if I can, and there's only one way to find out." She squared herself toward the door. "Relay to your command deck 2 things. Tell them not to vent the lower decks while I'm working. I can feel the pressure changing in my ears. They're thinking about it. And if they vent, they kill whoever's trapped down here, and they kill their only chance of ending this clean. And tell their engineers to repower the vault field. Full charge. Ready to drop. Because if I can move this thing at all, I'm going to move it back into the box it came out of, and I'll need the box working when I get it there. Ren. Relay it, Doctor. He relayed it. Somewhere far above, on a deck he couldn't see, an administrator he'd argued with all afternoon received a girl's instructions through a forgotten channel, and to Oruvesh's lasting surprise followed them. Then the blast door failed. It did not fail dramatically. That was the thing Oruvesh would remember, that the end of the barrier between them and the warform was not an explosion, but a slow, grinding, almost patient collapse, the door bending inward around a shape that pressed against it the way a rising tide presses against a wall, without hurry, without doubt, with the total confidence of a thing that has never once encountered a barrier it did not eventually pass. The metal screamed. The seal lost its grip. And the warform came through into the red corridor light, and Oruvesh, who had spent the afternoon telling himself he understood the word combat class, understood that he had not understood it at all. It was 4 meters of purpose. Everything about it had been decided by someone who wanted a specific thing done, and did not care what it cost the doing. The armor was grown, not forged plates of dense living matter, layered over a frame that the cradle upstairs would have rendered as solid metal. Where its forelimbs should have ended in hands, there were the blades the treaty stories always mentioned, and the stories had undersold them. And its head Oruvesh had braced for a monster's head, all jaw and hunger, and instead found something worse. A blunt, almost featureless shape, eyeless, purely functional, a head built not to see the world but to end the part of it that stood in front of it. It had been 8 years asleep, and it woke into a corridor with no enemy and no order and no war, and it had done the only thing its makers had left it able to do. It had gone looking for something to hold ground against. It found the girl. The warform stopped. In the red light, in the ringing after the door's death, it went still, and its blunt eyeless head turned a few degrees, orienting on the small, unarmored shape standing calm in the corridor, and Oruvesh saw the thing he would never be able to explain to the prefect afterward, the thing that no reading could have predicted. He saw the warform recognize her, not as prey. Prey it would have simply walked through, the way it had walked through the wardens. It went still the way a duelist goes still at the sight of another blade. Something in the machinery of it, some grown instinct its makers had wired in to know friend from foe from equal, looked at Ren Halliday and registered the one category it had been built to take seriously. A thing that would not stop. There it is, Ren said softly. She had seen the recognition too. Okay, so we are the same stuff, you and me. That's good and it's bad. Good, because it means you'll pay attention to me instead of walking past me to eat everyone upstairs. Bad, because it means this is going to hurt. She did not raise her voice and she did not lower her body into any fighting stance, because she had no fighting stance, because she was a girl who tended plants. She simply stood and faced it, and spoke to it the way she'd spoken to Toon, to Kassal, to the machine. I know what you are. You're holding ground. That was your last order and nobody ever came to give you another one, and you've been holding it in your sleep for 8 years and now you're awake and there's no ground and no order and no war, so you're going to hold this corridor, this station, until something stops you. She took one step toward it. I'm the something. I'm sorry. You didn't ask for any of this any more than I did. But I've got people 2 decks up who are breathing because a doctor knew his job, and I'm not going to let you climb up there and unbreathe them. So we're going to do this, and I need you to come at me, not up. Come down. Come at me. The warform came at her. Oruvesh had treated the injuries of 9 species. He had seen bodies do the things bodies do at the far edge of survival. He had never seen anything like what happened in the next few seconds in the red corridor, and he never fully found the words for it afterward, though he tried, because the prefect required a report, and because he owed the girl a witness. The blade came down where she had been standing, and she was no longer standing there. She had not dodged the way the frightened dodge, all flailing and luck. She had simply moved once economically, the way she did everything, reading the blow before it committed and stepping out of the place it was going to be, and the blade rang off the deck plate where she'd stood with a force that put a crack in the floor. And before the warform could recover the blade, she was inside its reach. Not attacking. She had nothing to attack with but close, against the one place 4 meters of blade could not easily reach. Her burned face inches from grown armor that had killed 4 wardens, calm, reading, learning it the way she'd let it learn her. Then it caught her. It got a limb across her and through her, and she hit the corridor wall hard enough that Oruvesh heard it in his own chest, heard the impact that would have ended any of his patients, would have folded a Sethric spine and burst a Gelt's inner shell, and Ren Halliday slid down the wall to the deck and got a hand under herself and stood back up. She stood back up. The war form went still again, and Oruvesh understood that it had just learned the same thing about her that his instruments had learned all afternoon, that it had struck her with a blow built to end things, and the thing had not ended, that it had, for the first time in a purpose-built existence, met the article it was written to be, in a body that had merely grown. "Yeah," Ren said, wiping blood from her mouth with the back of her wrist, her voice not changed at all, level, low, certain. "I told you it was going to hurt. It's going to hurt both of us. That's what we're for." She pushed off the wall. "Come on, down, follow me down. I've got a box to put you back in, and you're going to make me earn every meter of it." She turned her back on the thing that had just thrown her into a wall, a deliberate turn, an invitation, the most dangerous thing Oruvesh had ever watched a patient do, and she began to walk, unhurried, back toward the ruined blast door and the ramp beyond it and the vault 4 decks down. And the warform, recognizing the one category it took seriously, followed her. Kessal found them on the ramp, the girl walking backward down toward the lower hold, the warform following her step for step, and the old reconstructor pressed against the corridor wall above with his medical kit clutched in his lower hands, watching a thing he clearly had no framework for. Kessal had a framework for none of it either, but he had spent his life in the discipline of doing the job in front of him even when the framework failed, and the job in front of him was suddenly, unbelievably, clear. The girl was doing what his whole cast had failed to do. She was moving the specimen. Not stopping it, nothing stopped it, but moving it, drawing it, leading it down and away from the 10,000 souls above, back toward the box it had come out of. She had done in 2 minutes what 2 decks of wardens had died failing to do, and she had done it by walking backward and refusing to fall down. "Warden," she said without taking her eyes off the warform. She'd known he was there. She always knew who was in the room. "Good, I need you. Not to fight it, you can't. You already found that out and I'm sorry about your people. I need your hands and your access." She stepped down another stair, and the warform stepped down after her, and a blade came across and she read it and it caught only the wall, sparking, gouging a furrow in the deck plate. "Your engineers are repowering the vault field. But somebody has to be at the vault's manual controls when I get this thing back inside. Because if I bring it home and the box won't shut, I've just walked it down to where it started and given it a shorter climb back up. Can you work the vault controls?" "I can." Kessal fell in above her on the ramp, matching her slow backward descent, keeping the warform's attention split. Orsk knew the sequence better. "Orsk is dead on this ramp somewhere behind it." His voice did not shake. He had gotten past shaking. "I know it well enough. What do you need?" "I need the field armed and the manual drop ready, and I need you clear of the chamber when it goes, because when I put this thing back in the box I don't know if the field takes just it or everything standing in the ring." She said it flatly, the arithmetic of her own possible death folded in among the logistics like one more line item. "So you said it, you get to the door, and you drop it on my mark. Not before. If you drop it before I've got the thing fully inside, it clips the field boundary and shrugs it and we've spent our one charge. On my mark. Can you hold that? Can you watch me be inside the ring with it and wait for my mark?" Kessal looked at the small backward-walking girl and the 4 meters of grown war stepping down after her. and understood that she was asking him whether he could stand at a door and watch her stand inside a killing field with the thing that had slaughtered his wardens, and wait, and not drop it early to save her, because dropping it early would waste the only shot and doom everyone. "I can hold it," he said, and meant it, and was ashamed of how much it cost him to mean it when she was spending so much more without any visible cost at all. They went down. It should have taken 2 minutes. It took 12, because a station is not a straight line and because the girl would not take the fast way. The fast way was the central ramp, straight down to the hold, and she abandoned it at the third landing without explanation, turning instead into a side gallery that Kessel knew led the long way around through the maintenance warrens. He almost argued. Then he heard what she'd heard, a sound under the warform's grinding pursuit, thin and human and terrified, coming from a sealed maintenance bay off the side gallery. Voices. Trapped voices. The maintenance crews the deck officer had counted in the vent zone, sealed in by their own emergency doors when the specimen woke, waiting in the dark below the third seal for either rescue or the vacuum. "There's people in there," Wren said. She'd stopped at the sealed bay, and the war form had stopped too, 20 feet up the gallery, its blunt head tracking her, and Kessel watched her make the calculation and hated that he already knew the answer. "Warden, open that bay, get them out and up. I'll hold it here." "If I open that bay, the specimen comes through the open door after the sound of them." "It won't, because I'll be louder." She turned deliberately and put herself between the sealed bay and the war form, and did the thing again, the thing that stopped Kessel's hearts. She made herself the more interesting target, took a step toward the specimen into its reach, so that the eyeless head fixed on her and forgot the muffled voices behind the door. "Open it, now. I didn't come down here to trade those people for a shorter walk." Kessel opened the bay. There were 9 of them inside, dock hands and system techs, 4 species, packed into a maintenance cell in the dark, and they came out in a flood of terror and relief, and then froze solid at the sight of the warform 20 feet away in the gallery, and Wren Halliday standing between it and them with blood on her mouth and her back to them, saying, without turning around, in a voice pitched exactly to move frightened people without frightening them further. "Up the gallery left at the junction, don't run in a clump. The warden's people are above the third seal. Go now, go steady, don't look back. I've got it, it's looking at me, it's not looking at you. Go." They went. Kessel herded them, got them moving up the gallery in the steady stream she'd ordered rather than the panic clot they wanted to be. And behind him he heard the warform come at her again, heard the ring and gouge of a blade meeting deck instead of girl, heard the impact of a body against a bulkhead, and then, after a pause that stopped his hearts entirely, heard her breathing resume, ragged now but resuming, and heard her voice, thinner than before but still level, still doing the job, still here. Still the more interesting thing in the room. "Come on, down, leave them, come down with me." She was, Kessel realized as he pushed the last of the maintenance crew up past the third seal, spending herself. The instruments upstairs had not been able to find the top of her, but there was a top. There was always a top. Refusing to die was not the same as not dying, and every blow she read a hair too slow, every wall she hit, every second she stood inside the reach of a thing built to end her, was drawn from a reserve that was deep but not bottomless. She was buying the station's 10,000 with it, 1 trapped maintenance crew at a time, 1 detour at a time, and she was going to keep buying until the reserve ran out, because that was what the reading meant. That was the part the machine had smelled and had no gentle word for, not that she could spend herself this way, but that she would, down here in the dark, for people whose names she'd never learn. "Warden," the command channel, Yult's voice tight. "The specimen's marker just dropped below the 4th deck. It's going the wrong way, it's going down." "How?" "The human's leading it down," Kessel said. "Back to the vault, hold the vent. Do you hear me, deck, hold the vent. She's walking it home. Do not vent the lower decks." A pause. Then Salivar's voice, the prefect who never raised it, and there was something in it Kessel had never heard there before, something that in a lesser being he might have called awe. Vent is held. Engineers report vault field at full charge, ready to drop. Warden, tell her the box is ready. Tell her whenever she's ready the box is ready. A breath. And tell her the whole deck is watching the marker, all of us. Watching her walk it down. Kessel relayed it. And down in the dark, walking backward into the hold she'd been carried out of, blood on her mouth and one arm hanging wrong now, Wren Halliday heard that the box was ready and that the whole command deck was watching her, and she did not slow, and she did not speed up, and all she said was, "Good. Then everybody hold still and let me finish." The vault chamber was a wide, low room built around the containment ring, a circle of emitters set into the floor and ceiling, and between them the volume where the field would form, and in the center of that volume, the empty cradle of amber suspension where the specimen had hung asleep for 8 years. It hung empty now. The war form had torn its way out of it in the first surge, and the tearing had left the cradle a ruin, and the ruin was the clearest possible statement of the problem. The box had been built to hold a thing that slept. It had never been asked to catch a thing that was awake and did not want to be caught. Kessel reached the vault controls at the chamber's edge while Wren was still leading the warform down the last of the ramp. The engineers had done their work. The field was charged, the readouts green, the manual dropped live under a guard cover. Kessel flipped back with a working limb. He keyed the command channel. At the controls, field's hot, drops live, I'm ready on your mark. Not yet, Wren said. She came into the chamber backward, one arm hanging, blood down the side of her face now as well as her mouth, and even so she came in reading. Kessel watched her eyes move over the ring, the emitters, the wrecked cradle, the geometry of the room, taking in the whole shape of what had to happen with a glance. It has to be all the way inside the ring, not near it, inside it. If any part of it's crossing the boundary when the field forms around a moving mass and it fails, and we don't get a second charge. So I have to get it to the center, to where the cradle is, all of it. And I have to be there to keep it there, because the second it feels the walls come up it's going to run, and there's nothing in this room that can stop it running except me. Kessel felt the shape of what she was describing land in him like a blow. You're going to be inside the ring when the field forms. Yes. The field doesn't sort friend from enemy, girl. It takes the volume. Everything in the ring at set is in the box. You'll be in the box, with it, for however long it takes the treaty's ethics offices to argue about the next specimen, which for the last one was 8 years. I know what the field does. She said it without heat, backing further in, drawing the warform after her, step by step, toward the center of the ring. That's why the mark matters. The field doesn't form all at once. It sets. There's a window between when you drop it and when it locks. The emitters build the boundary from the edges in, and for a few seconds there's a gap at the center that isn't closed yet. That's my window. You drop on my mark, I keep the thing in the center while the walls build, and I go out through the gap before it seals. She reached the wrecked cradle, the exact center of the ring, and stopped there, and turned finally to face the warform fully, the two of them alone in the middle of the circle. It's a few seconds either way, Warden. A few seconds where I'm in the box holding it still, and a few seconds getting out through a hole that's closing. That's the whole plan. That's the whole margin. Everything's in those few seconds. Oruvesh had come as far as the chamber door, against every order she'd given him, medical kit in hand, and he heard the plan and understood it fully for the first time and heard himself say, "That's not a margin. That's a coin toss. Wren, that's, if you read one thing a fraction slow, if the gap closes a half-second early, you're in the box for 8 years or you're dead in the field, and either way I can't reach you. There's no medicine for either of those." "Doctor," she didn't look at him. She was watching the warform come the last few steps toward her into the center of the ring, blade limbs rising, blunt head fixed on the one thing in the universe it took seriously. You've spent all afternoon telling frightened people the truth because the rule says you don't lie to them about the machine. I've watched you do it. It's the best thing about you. So here's me doing the same for you. This is the plan, and it's a bad plan, and it's the only plan, and the alternative is that thing climbs back up to where my crew is sleeping. I'd rather toss the coin down here where the only person I'm betting is me. Now she did glance at him, one flick of her eyes, and there was something almost gentle in it. Keep your kit ready. If the coin comes up right, I'm going to need every bit of 40 years' worth of you the second I'm out of this ring. So don't watch me. Get your kit open. Be the medicine. That's the job you came down here for. The war form reached the center. It was fully inside the ring now, all 4 meters of it, blade limbs and grown armor and eyeless purpose, standing in the wreck of the cradle it had slept in, facing the small broken girl who had walked it all the way home. Everything was in position. Everything was in the window that hadn't opened yet. Warden, Ren said, quiet, level. Get to the door, hand on the drop, wait for my mark. Kassal went to the door. He put a working limb on the manual drop. He watched the girl stand in the center of a killing ring with the thing that had killed his wardens, and he did the hardest thing his caste had ever asked of him, which was nothing, which was to wait, to hold, to keep his limbs still on the drop while every instinct 10,000 years of soldiering had built into him screamed to trip it now, close the box now while the thing was in it, and never mind the girl. He waited. And in the center of the ring, Ren Halliday looked up at the war form. This thing that was made of the same refusing to die she was made of. This thing that had been switched on for a war that ended without it, and left to hold ground that no longer existed. And she did not brace to fight it, because she understood at last that fighting it was not the plan and had never been the plan. You could not outfight a thing built only to fight. You could only outlast it. And outlasting it meant giving it the one thing 8 years of sleep and 2 decks of dead wardens never had. Hey, she said to it, soft, almost kind. Hey, I know what you're doing, you're holding the ground. Nobody ever came to tell you the war was over, so you just kept holding all this time in the dark, waiting for an order that never came. She took 1 step toward it, into the reach of the blades, close enough to touch the grown armor, close enough that a single blow would end everything. I'm going to give you the order. All right. Somebody should have a long time ago and nobody did, so it's me. It's going to be me. She lifted her unbroken hand, slow, open, no weapon in it, and laid it flat against the warform's grown plate, over the place a heart would be if it had been the kind of thing that had one. Stand down, Ren said. The war's over. You held the ground. You held it longer than anyone could have asked. It's yours now, all of it. You can stop. Her voice did not shake. Stand down, soldier. Rest. Oruvesh, kneeling at the chamber door with his kit open across his knees, saw the warform pause. He would argue with himself about it for the rest of his life. Whether a made thing could understand a language it had never been given, whether 8 years of holding ground in the dark could be answered by a girl's hand on its plate, whether what he saw was mercy landing or merely a machine hesitating over a target that would not resolve into an enemy. He never settled it, but he saw the pause. He saw the blade limbs, already rising to end her, stop at the top of their arc. He saw the blunt eyeless head can a degree toward the small hand pressed flat against its armor, toward the voice saying, stand down, soldier, rest. And he saw the enormous grown body go, for one impossible held breath, still, not the stillness of a thing about to strike, but the stillness of a thing that has been carrying a weight for a very long time, and has just, for the first time, been told it is allowed to set the weight down. Mark, Ren said. She did not shout it. She said it the way she'd said everything all day, flat and low, and it carried across the silent chamber because the chamber was holding its breath with her, and Kessal's working limb came down on the drop before the word was fully out of her mouth. The emitters woke. Oruvesh felt the field begin before he saw it, a pressure in his back teeth, a wrongness in the air, the containment volume charging from the ring inward. The walls of it built from the edges, a shimmer climbing floor to ceiling around the circle's rim and closing toward the center in a shrinking bright aperture. Exactly as she'd said, the gap at the middle narrowing second by second toward the two figures standing in it. And the warform felt the walls come up. Whatever the stillness had been, mercy, hesitation, the weight set down, it broke the instant the field touched the specimen's grown senses, because a thing built to hold ground does not consent to a cage cannot, was made without the part that consents. The blade limbs came down. The eyeless head snapped back to the girl, threat resolved, enemy found, and 4 meters of purpose detonated toward her all at once in the closing bright ring. Ren was already moving. She had not waited to see whether the stand-down held. That was the thing Oruvesh understood only afterward, replaying it. She had never bet on the mercy. The mercy had been true, and it had bought her the one held breath she needed to say the word, and the instant the word was said, she had spent the breath and gone, reading the warform's rage before it committed the way she'd read every blow all day, twisting out of the path of the descending blades and toward the shrinking gap at the ring's edge. The blade came down where she'd been. It caught the trailing edge of her. Oruvesh saw it catch her, saw her whole body wrenched by it, saw blood, and it did not stop her, because the machinery the ledger had smelled that afternoon was the machinery of a thing that finished crossing the room even after the room had done its worst to it. She hit the closing aperture as it narrowed to the width of a body, and she went through it low and hard and graceless, all the economy of her movement finally abandoned for the single animal imperative of out, and the field sealed behind her heel with a sound like the sky closing, and the warform's blades rang against the inside of a wall that was, now, finally, a wall. The specimen was in the box. It struck the field once, twice, a third time, 4 meters of grown war throwing itself against a containment that held now because the thing inside it was fully inside it. All its mass caught its set, no part of it crossing the boundary to spoil the geometry. The field flexed and held, flexed and held. The warform stood in the center of the ring, in the wreck of the cradle it had slept in, blade limbs rising and falling against walls it could not pass, and slowly Oruvesh watched it happen, and could not have said whether it was the field's doing or the girl's. Slowly it stopped striking. It went still in the amber light. It stood in the box, holding the only ground left to it, the small circle of floor it would hold now for however many years the ethics offices took to argue, and Oruvesh thought, watching it, that perhaps she had told it the truth after all, that the ground was its now, that it could stop. Then he stopped watching the box, because the girl was on the floor outside the ring and she was not getting up, and getting up was the thing she did, and she was not doing it. He crossed the chamber before he decided to move. Kesal was already there, off the controls, dropping to his 4 knees beside her, the warden who'd wanted her frozen 6 hours ago now cradling her head off the deck plate with a gentleness his caste was not built for. And Oruvesh got his kit down beside her and got his eyes on her, and for one cold falling instant every one of his 40 years deserted him at once, because the blade had opened her along the side worse than he'd let himself see in the ring, and there was so much blood, and she was gray the way she'd been gray coming in off the wreck, only worse, and her eyes were half open and unfocused, and her breathing was the shallow, uneven breathing that came just before the breathing that came last. No, Oruvesh said to no one, to the machine that wasn't there to 40 years. No. Not this one. His hands were already moving, all 4 of them, the front pair steady out of the deepest habit he owned, and the back pair not steady at all, but moving, doing the work, packing the wound, finding the vessels, doing the 1,000 small procedural things that were the only prayer he had ever learned. Kesal, my kit, the sealed pack, the one marked in red, open it and give it to my lower hands. Ren, look at me. You told me to be the medicine. I'm the medicine. Look at me and stay where I can reach you. Her eyes found him, barely. The focus swam and caught and swam again. Crew, she said. It came out of her on almost no breath at all. Still breathing. Still breathing, Oruvesh said, working. his hands full of the job. 2 decks up, all 3 breathing fine, and the maintenance crew you stopped for, all 9 above the 3rd seal, and the 10,000 upstairs who never even knew. Everyone's breathing, Ren. You kept them all breathing. Now you're going to do the one thing you haven't done all day, which is let someone keep you breathing, so stop talking and let me work. Something that might have been the ghost of the flat calm crossed her gray face. Bad plan, she breathed. Told you it was a bad plan. It was a terrible plan, Oruvesh said, and his voice did the thing he had spent 40 years training it never to do and cracked. It was the worst plan I've ever watched succeed. Stay with me. Her eyes started to close. And then Oruvesh felt it before he understood it, felt it under his hands as he worked. The thing that had scared an entire waystation for 6 hours turning, in the space of a breath, into the only reason he had a patient at all. He felt her body refuse. Felt the machinery the ledger had smelled that afternoon come up out of some deep reserve and take hold. The blood clotting under his hands faster than it should, faster than any patients he had ever treated. The vessels closing themselves half a step ahead of his instruments. The gray holding at the edge of gray and not going past it. The shallow, uneven breathing catching itself and steadying, low but steady, refusing the last drop it was so close to taking. The combat class body. The thing built to refuse to die. Doing the one thing it had been built across 100,000 years to do. Here on his chamber floor, with her hand gone slack in Kessal's grip, and her doctor's 4 hands buried in the work of keeping her. There it is, Oruvesh breathed, and did not know he'd said it, did not know he'd borrowed her own words from the corridor. There it is, that's it, that's the reading, come on, refuse it. Refuse it the way you refused everything else today. He looked up once at Kessal, and the warden looked back, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that the flag the whole station had spent the day afraid of handling class. Combat, confidence rising, was the only thing standing between this girl and the deck plate, and that they had very nearly frozen it and vented it and been rid of it to feel safe. Get her to my bay, Oruvesh said. Now, carefully. She's holding on with everything the machine measured, and I need my full instruments before the reserve runs out. Kessal, carry her like she's the most breakable thing on this station. She's the least breakable thing on this station, Kessal said, gathering her up in his 4 arms with a tenderness that would have astonished his own wardens. I know, said Oruvesh. Carry her like she's the other thing. Carry her like she's the thing I couldn't classify. They did not, in the end, dose her like everyone else. They dosed her like the machine said. That was the thing Toon would remember from the 4 hours he spent at Oruvesh's side in the reconstruction bay, while the old reconstructor fought to keep the girl on the right side of the line between gray and gone. That every instinct they had, every reflex of a career, wanted to reach for the standard doses, the gentle amounts that would have carried any patient of any of the 9 species through a wound like this, and every one of those amounts would have killed her. Because her body would have scrubbed the sedation and torn the sutures and fought the very care that was trying to save it. The flag had told them exactly this. She will resist sedation. She will metabolize what you give her faster than you can dose it. They had spent the afternoon reading the flag as a threat. Now, working over her, they read it as an instruction manual, and it was the truest one they had, and it saved her. More, Oruvesh said, watching the readouts. She's already clearing it. Her body thinks the sedation is a poison and it's winning. Match the class Toon. Dose her like the thing on the wall, not like the girl on the table. That's reconstructor. That dose would stop a Gelt's heart. She's not a Gelt. She's the class. Trust the class. Oruvesh's hands did not stop. This is what the flag was for. This is what it was trying to tell us before we got frightened of it. It was never a warning about what she'd do to us. It was a warning about what we'd do to her if we treated her like everyone else. The registry writers 200 years ago weren't afraid of the combat class patients. They were watching combat class patients die on their tables from ordinary care, and they made a word so it would stop happening. He glanced at the apprentice. We had it backwards all day. Everyone did. The flag protects her from us. It always did. The girl held. Hour by hour, the machinery the ledger had smelled did its work, and the readouts that had saturated the instruments that afternoon now bent every one of them toward keeping her alive. The marrow that broke no instrument scale feeding the blood she'd lost back faster than his transfusions could. The repair agents that had read as acute trauma when she lay calm now swarming a wound that finally deserved them. The reflex and the density and the refusal to die all turned inward, for once. On the single project of her own survival, Oruvesh had spent 40 years being the thing that stood between his patients and death. For 4 hours in that bay he was something he had never been before, a partner to a patient's own body, running alongside it, handing it tools and letting it do the lifting, because it could lift more than he could. By the watch change she was stable. By the watch after that she was asleep, real sleep. Not the gray edge of gone, breathing slow and even. The burned jaw and the bandaged wrist joined now by a long sealed line down her side that Oruvesh had closed with the best work of his life. He sat beside her when it was done, all 4 hands finally still, and he was aware of Toon standing at the foot of the table not looking at the girl but at him, and he knew what the apprentice was going to ask before he asked it. "Reconstructor, what do we tell the prefect?" "About the flag." Oruvesh looked at his own reconstructor's note, still glowing where he'd left it hours ago, before the lights first browned. The registry measures capacity. It does not measure use. "We tell the prefect the truth," he said, "which is that the flag was right about every single thing it measured and wrong about the only thing that mattered, and that the wrongness wasn't in the machine, it was in us. The machine said this one is combat class, it was correct, and every one of us heard this one is dangerous to us, and that was the part we added. The machine never said it. We brought the fear ourselves and hung it on a true reading." He was quiet a moment. She kept telling us that. All afternoon, that the flag was thin. That it was a true thing with most of the truth cut off. We didn't listen because we were busy being afraid of the sliver we could see. He looked at the sleeping girl. The whole rest of the animal walked down 4 decks and put the monster back in its box and nearly died doing it, and the machine had no line for that. There's no gauge for it. She told me that too, that they don't have a class for the part that makes her go. They just call it her name. The prefect came at the 3rd watch change, and came alone, which Oruvesh had not expected. Salivar stood in the door of the bay in the gray administrative robes, looking at the girl on the table. And for a long moment the prefect, who had governed 140 years without raising a hand, did not seem to know what to do with 2 of them. "She'll live," Salivar said, not quite a question. "She'll live, because we finally dosed her the way the flag told us to, 6 hours after the flag told us." Oruvesh did not soften it. He had stopped softening things somewhere in the red corridor. "If we'd frozen her this afternoon, the specimen would have reached the wards. If we'd vented the lower decks tonight, we'd have killed her and the maintenance crews and lost our only means of ending it clean. Every easy thing this station reached for today would have gotten us all killed. The only thing that worked was the thing we were most afraid of." He held the prefect's gaze. "I'd like that in the record, prefect, in those words." "It's already in the record," Salivar said. "I put it there myself before I came down, in those words and worse ones." The prefect came into the bay slowly and stood over the girl, and studied her the way it had studied her that afternoon, the appraiser's complete look, but Oruvesh saw that the arithmetic had changed. That afternoon the prefect had looked at the small soft creature and let the machine overrule the evidence of its own eyes. Now it looked at the small soft creature and did not need the machine at all, because it had heard her voice on an open channel walking a monster down 4 decks, and it had put its hand near a vent that would have killed her and taken it away again, and it had learned the one thing no instrument could teach it. "I spent this afternoon nearly ordering her frozen to be comfortable," Salivar said. "And this evening I held a vent that would have solved 2 of my problems at once, and the only reason I held it was a feeling I could not have defended in any tribunal, a feeling that a creature who offers to climb into the box is a different thing from a creature you have to force into it, and that the difference is the entire difference, and that no registry the treaty owns knows how to measure it. The prefect's long face turned to Oruvesh. Your instrument found the danger and missed the person. I've governed for 140 years the same way. Found the danger, missed the person. It's the administrative disease reconstructor. She cured me of it in an afternoon, and it nearly cost her everything. Oruvesh had no answer to that, so he offered the only thing he had, which was the truth. She'd tell you it wasn't a cure. She'd tell you it was a reading, and that a reading isn't the same thing as an understanding, and that you did the understanding yourself when you held the vent. He glanced at the sleeping girl. She's very insistent on the difference. It's the most human thing about her, I think. She won't let a machine take the credit or the blame for what a person decides. The prefect was quiet for a while. The specimen, Salivar said at last. The war form it's holding in the box, stable. The ethics offices will want to argue about it for another 8 years, and I'll let them, and I'll keep it powered until they do. A pause. But I've read the vault log reconstructor, the chamber pickups, what she said to it before the field set. Something moved in the prefect's still face. She gave it an order, stand down. The war's over. You held the ground. Rest. She gave a thing built for slaughter the one thing its makers never did. She told it was allowed to stop. Salivar looked toward the lower decks, toward the vault 4 floors down where 4 meters of orphaned war stood quiet in its ring at last. The whole treaty has spent 200 years with a word for what that thing is. Combat class. The whole treaty. And a girl who tends plants looked at it for the first time in her life and understood in 30 seconds the thing 200 years of registries never wrote down, that it wasn't holding ground because it hated us. It was holding ground because nobody ever came to tell it could stop. The prefect's gaze came back to the sleeping human. That's not on any gauge either, is it? No, Oruvesh said. That's not on any gauge. Kesal came to the bay when his shift finally ended, which was long after any shift should have ended, because there had been the dead to gather, and the wounded to move, and the lower decks to seal, and the 100 small brutal tasks that follow a thing like this, and do not care how tired you are. He came in with the particular heaviness of a soldier who has lost people, and he stood a while at the foot of the girl's table without speaking, and Oruvesh let him stand, because there are things a reconstructor learns to leave alone. 4, Kesal said at last. I lost 4, Orsk, Vel, Thry, and the young one Mashun, who joined my detail 6 days ago and asked me on his first shift whether he'd ever have to fight anything real. The folded blade of his head bowed. I told him no. I told him this was a waystation, a hospital, that the dangerous things came to us already dying. I told him the specimen in the hold was asleep and would stay asleep, and that the treaty kept soldiers like us precisely so that the fragile species would never have to meet a thing like it. He was quiet. I lied to him without knowing I was lying. And then the thing woke and he met it, and it was exactly as bad as the story we tell hatchlings and worse, and my whole caste, the answer to who walks toward the monster, my whole caste broke against it like everyone breaks. You didn't break, Oruvesh said. You got your wounded out. You held the drop when every instinct you own told you to trip it early. You carried her here like she was breakable. I held the drop because she told me to, and I did what she told me because somewhere on that ramp I understood she was better at this than I would ever be, and that the most useful thing a soldier could do tonight was take orders from a girl who tends plants. Kesal looked at the sleeping human, and there was no shame in it, only a hard, clean recalibration, the sound of a floor being rebuilt. That's the part I'll carry, reconstructor, not that we broke. Everything breaks against the genuine article. I can make peace with that, it's physics, it's not failure. What I'll carry is that when the genuine article got loose and my whole caste couldn't hold it, the thing that was standing on your table the whole time, flagged, measured, and afraid of nothing, and we spent the afternoon deciding whether to freeze her. His working limbs opened, the Gelt gesture. I have not yet decided to hurt you, except now it meant something closer to a vow. I wanted her in a box this afternoon. I wanted on the record that I was wrong, not gently wrong. Wrong the way that gets people killed. She offered me the box to make me comfortable, and I nearly took it. And if I had, Mashun would still be dead, and so would everyone above the third seal, and I'd have called it prudence. She'd tell you that you held the vent when it counted, and the drop when it counted, and that the afternoon's fear doesn't cancel the evening's nerve. Oruvesh said it because it was true, and because the warden needed to hear it from someone. She's very precise about crediting people with what they actually did. You'll find it's almost impossible to get her to accept credit for herself, and almost impossible to get her to withhold it from anyone else. Kesal made a low sound that, in a gelt, was something like a laugh, with all the humor scraped out of it. The soldier's disease is the opposite, he said. We take all the credit and give none of the fear its due. He straightened. I'm going to sit with her a while if the medicine allows it. My people sit with the ones who held the line. She held a line 4 decks of us couldn't. She's not my caste and she's not my species, and I don't care. She held the line. I'll sit with her. The medicine allows it, Oruvesh said. So the warden sat, four-kneed and silent, a soldier of a soldier caste keeping watch over a sleeping plant tender. And it was, Oruvesh thought, the truest picture of the whole day, the answer to who walks toward the monster sitting vigil over the answer the treaty had never thought to write down. Word of what had happened moved through the waystation, the way the first word had moved, fast and human and merciless, except that it was a different word now, and it did a different thing to the people it reached. The gallery above the reconstruction bay filled again by the next watch, off-shift crew, dock hands, the 2 station medics, more than before. But they did not press against the glass the way they had that afternoon, when they'd come to look at the monster the stories warned them about. They stood back from it. They came in 1s and 2s, and they looked down at the small, burned girl asleep on the table with the warden keeping watch beside her, and there was nothing in their faces of the thing that had been there before, none of the child frightened by a story, none of the sober horror of meeting the punchline. What was in their faces, Oruvesh thought, watching them come and go, was harder to name and better. It was the look people wear at the edge of a thing that has quietly rearranged what they thought they knew. They had come that afternoon to see a weapon. They came back to see the person the weapon had turned out to be, the one who'd walked down into the dark while they ran up, and they went away quiet, and Oruvesh suspected that a good many of them would be telling the story wrong for the rest of their lives, telling it as the day the Deathworld girl saved the station, and getting the shape of it right even so, because the shape of it was true. She had. She'd just have hated the telling. She'd have said the day a station full of people each did one hard thing and it added up. She'd have credited the warden with the drop and the prefect with the held vent and the doctor with the medicine, and kept for herself only the walking down, and called that nothing, called it the job I got handed. She woke on the second day. Oruvesh was at his instruments when the readouts told him before her eyes did the slow, steady breathing quickening a fraction toward waking, the readings shifting from the flat plane of deep repair toward the surface. He came to the table. Kesal, who had barely left, straightened. And Wren Halliday opened her eyes in the reconstruction bay of an alien waystation, and the first thing she did, before the pain could reach her, before, "Where am I?" was exactly what her crewmate had done 2 decks up on the first night. "My crew," she said, barely a voice, "still breathing." "Still breathing," Oruvesh said, "all 3 awake, asking for you. And 9 maintenance workers and 4 wardens who lived, and 10,000 people upstairs who'll never know your name." He leaned in so she could find him. "And you're breathing too, which took some doing. You'll want to know that we finally listened to your machine and dosed you the way the flag said. It's the only reason you're looking at me." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. She was too gray for a smile, but the ghost of the flat, dry thing she'd carried all through the worst afternoon of the station's history. "Told you," she breathed. "Dose me like the machine says, not the medicine I was worried about." Her eyes drifted to Kesal, four-kneed at her side, and held there a moment. "You held the drop, Warden. I felt the field set." You waited for the mark. It was not a question and it was not thanks. It was the thing Oruvesh had told the warden she did, crediting a person precisely with what they had actually done. That was the hard part, not the walking down. Anyone made like me can walk down. The hard part was the one who had to stand at the door and watch and wait and not trip it early to save me. That was the part that took nerve. You had it. Kassal, who had lost 4 and nearly lost her, and had come into the bay carrying more than he could say, bowed the folded blade of his head. And for a moment the soldier caste and the death-world girl simply looked at each other. Two things built to walk toward the monster. One of them finally understanding what the other had always been for. "I wanted you frozen," Kassal said. He said it because she deserved the truth and because he could not carry it silently. "This afternoon, I wanted you in a box." "I know," Ren said. "I offered you one. It's all right, Warden. Everybody wants the frightening thing in a box. It's the most reasonable want there is." Her eyes were already drifting closed again, the waking costing her more than she had. "The trick is what you do the second the frightening thing turns out to be a person, and you carried me here like I was breakable. A breath. You did the second part right. That's the only part that was ever going to matter." She healed the way she'd bled, faster than the instruments believed, the long line down her side knitting under Oruvesh's care at a rate that would have alarmed him in any other patient, and now simply confirmed everything the ledger had said on the first afternoon. By the 4th day she was sitting up. By the 6th she was arguing with him about being allowed to walk, and losing, and then walking anyway when he left the bay, so that he came back to find her at the observation glass looking down at the corridor where it had all started, small and bandaged and upright, the way she was apparently determined to be upright about everything. They let her crewmates in on the 5th day. The young man from the recovery ward came first, on his own feet by then, and he crossed the bay and stopped in front of her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And then he said, "You went down," and she said, "Somebody had to," and he said, "It's always you that has to," and she said, "It's always the one who's built for it. This time it happened to be me. On the Pharaoh's patience it was going to be you if the ring had folded the other way." And he had no answer to that, because it was true, because they were both the same stuff, all of them, the whole small crew of plant tenders and cargo hands, any one of whom would have walked down if the day had handed them the walking down. Oruvesh watched the reunion from his instruments and understood a thing he had been circling for 6 days. That the flag had not been about Ren Halliday at all, not specifically. That if the cradle had scanned any of them, the young man, the sleeping crew, the 10,000 of her kind he would never meet, it would have climbed the same way, saturated the same instruments, hung the same word on the same wall. She was not an exceptional human. That was the part the station had never grasped, the part that made the whole day so much larger than one girl. She was an ordinary one. The least dangerous person in every room she'd ever walked into, she'd said, and she'd meant it, and it was true, and the ledger had looked at the least dangerous of them and found combat class and could not stop climbing. The exceptional thing was not her. The exceptional thing was her whole kind, at baseline, unaltered, the ordinary factory setting of a people the galaxy told its hatchlings about to frighten them into caution. "You're doing it again," Ren said without turning from the glass. "Going quiet, working something out. What is it this time, Doctor?" "I was working out that you're not special," Oruvesh said, and heard how it sounded and did not take it back, because she would understand it, because she understood everything faster than his instruments. "I mean it as the largest compliment I have ever paid anything. I've been treating you for 6 days as though you were an extraordinary human, and I've just understood that you'd be insulted by that, and that the truth is worse and bigger. You're an ordinary one. Any of your crew would have gone down. The flag isn't a reading on Ren Halliday. It's a reading on your whole species at rest, doing nothing, born. That's the thing the station will never quite manage to hold in its head. It's not that we met a dangerous human. It's that we met an average one, and the average one nearly broke every instrument I own by lying still." Ren was quiet for a moment. Then she turned from the glass, and there was something serious in her face, more serious than the calm, the closest she'd come all along to wanting to be understood. "Can I tell you the thing about the word?" she said. "The class, combat, because you've been circling it kindly for a week and you've almost got it, and I'd like you to have it all the way since you earned it keeping me alive." She lowered herself carefully onto the edge of the cradle, the one that had first read her. "Your registry writers made that word 200 years ago because their patients were dying under ordinary care. That's true, and it's decent, and it saved lives, mine included. But they made it looking at my kind across a battlefield, so they filed the whole of us under the one face we were showing them, which was the fighting face. And here's the thing they couldn't have known, standing where they stood." She looked at him steadily. "The fighting face and the surviving face are the same face. There's no second machinery. The bones that don't break when I fight are the bones that don't break when the hull folds. The blood that won't run out when I'm cut is the blood that won't run out when I'm hurt saving someone. The part of me that walked down 4 decks toward your monster is the exact same part that would walk down 4 decks toward a fire, or a breach, or a sick child, or nothing at all, just a job that needed doing in a bad place. It's one machine, Doctor. It only ever had one job. The job is don't die, and don't let the people behind you die either. That's the whole of it. Your word saw it kill and called it a weapon. It never got to see it stay and hold and carry and give an order to a frightened thing in a box. So the word's not wrong. It's just standing on the one side of the machine where all you can see is teeth." Oruvesh set down the instrument in his hands. "Capacity," he said quietly, "not use." "Say that again." "It's what I wrote. On your profile the first afternoon before any of this. The registry measures capacity. It does not measure use." He almost laughed, the tired near laugh of a man who finds he understood a thing before he understood it. "I wrote it as a defense of you. A note to keep the prefect from acting on the flag alone. I thought I was carving out an exception. Yes, she's combat class, but look, she chooses not to. And that's not it at all, is it? That's still standing on the teeth side. You're telling me there's no exception. You're telling me the capacity and the use aren't two things with a choice between them. They're one machine, and the machine's whole purpose was survival from the start, and combat was only ever what survival looks like when something's trying to kill you. The choosing isn't an exception to the weapon. The choosing is what the thing was always for." "There it is," Ren said softly, and this time it was a smile, gray and tired and real. "That's the whole animal, Doctor. You've got it. Took you a week and a monster and a hull's worth of my blood, but you've got it, which is more than 200 years of registry writers managed, so don't be hard on yourself about the week." She settled back. "Now do something with it. That's the part that matters. Understanding's cheap if it stays in the room. You've got a machine that flags every one of my kind that ever lands on your table, and it hangs one word on us, and the word sends frightened people reaching for freezers and vents. You can't change what the machine measures. The readings are true. I keep telling you the readings are true. But you can change what it says. You can give the word back the rest of itself." Toon was the one who did it in the end, which Oruvesh thought was right. The apprentice had spent the week changed. The young Sethric who had come to medicine to make frightening things smaller had watched a frightening thing turn out to be the most reliable person on the station, and it had done something to him that Oruvesh recognized from his own long-ago training. The moment a young reconstructor stops being afraid of the readings and starts being curious about them. The moment the machine stops being an oracle and becomes a tool with a shape and a history and a set of blind spots you can learn. Toon had spent 3 days in the registry archives on his own time, reading 200 years back to the terrible battlefield medicine that had birthed the combat class, and he came to Oruvesh with the whole history in his hands and a proposal in his mouth. "We can't remove the flag," Toon said. "The reconstructor's right, the girl's right, the readings are true, and removing it would kill the next one under ordinary dosing. But look," he spread the archive across Oruvesh's console, "the class was never meant to be a verdict. The founders wrote it as a handling note, a dosing instruction. Somewhere in 200 years it curdled into a threat flag, and the security registries cross-linked to it. And now the medical word trips the warden's alarms, and that's the whole disaster of the first afternoon in one bad cross-reference. The founder's word said handle with care. This one won't respond to ordinary medicine. The registry we inherited says danger. Those aren't the same word. We've been reading the founder's care as our fear for 200 years. Oruvesh looked at the young Sethric, membranes no longer pale, and felt the particular pride of a man watching the next hands take up the work with a better grip than his own. Then fix the cross-reference, he said. Uncurdle the word. What would you have it say? What Toon would have it say took 3 more days to write and argue and get past the prefect's office, and Wren Halliday was well enough by then to sit in on the arguing, which she did the way she did everything, from the edge, quietly, letting the people whose registry it was do the deciding and speaking only when a thing was about to go wrong. She spoke exactly twice. The first time was when the treaty's medical liaison, a 4-armed scholar caste official who had been rooted in by the ethics offices the moment word of a live combat class event reached them, proposed keeping the security cross-reference and simply adding a note. Flag remains, advisory appended. Leave the alarm, soften it with a paragraph. It was, Oruvesh thought, the most natural administrative instinct in the galaxy. Change nothing that exists, add something that costs nothing, call it reform. No, Wren said from the edge. It was the first word she'd said in an hour, and the room turned to it. You're going to leave the alarm and add a paragraph nobody reads in the 4 seconds a scanner takes. I've been on the receiving end of your 4 seconds. Nobody reads the paragraph. They read the alarm and they reach for the freezer. She looked at the scholar caste official without heat. The whole problem is that the medical word trips the security alarm. You can add 1,000 paragraphs and the alarm still trips first. If you're serious, you cut the cross-reference. The medical registry keeps the flag because the flag is true and it saves our lives on your tables. The security registry stops being told. A dosing instruction shouldn't summon armed wardens. That's the entire bug. Everything else today grew out of that one bad wire. She sat back. You don't fix a bad wire with a paragraph. You fix it by cutting the wire. They cut the wire. The second time she spoke was at the very end, when the wording of the handling note itself was on the table, and the room had spent 2 hours trying to write something dignified, something that gave the class back the rest of itself, and every draft had come out either frightened or flattering, either dangerous but restrained or a noble and mighty people, and both were wrong, and everyone in the room could feel they were wrong and none of them could say why. Wren could say why. You keep writing about what we might do, she said. Every draft, capable of great harm, possessed of great strength, restrained, noble, mighty, you're all still standing on the teeth. Stop describing the weapon and describe the patient. She was quiet a moment, and then she said the thing that ended the arguing, said it flat and plain the way she'd told Toon where to find the vein a lifetime and 8 days ago. Write down what's actually true. This patient's body is built to survive what would kill you. It will resist your medicine, outclot your instruments, and refuse to die past the point where you'd expect it to. Dose it accordingly. And be aware that the same body that frightens your machine is, in every case on record, the one that walks toward your emergencies and not away from them. Handle with care, not because it is dangerous to you, because it is, more often than not, the last thing standing between you and the danger. She looked around the room. That's not flattery and it's not fear. It's just the reading, all of it, both sides of the machine. Put that on the wall and let people meet the whole animal in the 4 seconds instead of a third of it. The room was silent for a moment. Then the scholar caste official who had come to soften a flag and stayed to rewrite 200 years said quietly, "Say it once more, slowly, so the recorder catches every word." She said it once more, slowly. The recorder caught every word. They powered the specimen indefinitely in the end, and the ethics offices took up their 8-year argument about it exactly as the prefect had predicted. and the warform held its small circle of ground in the vault below, quiet now, still, standing where a girl had told it was allowed to stand and rest. Oruvesh went down once before the girl left to look at it, the thing the word had been written for, the genuine article. It did not move when he came in. It held its ground and watched him with the eyeless attention of a thing that would hold that ground until the stars went out, and Oruvesh found that he could not look at it any more the way he had that first night, as a monster, as the punchline of a story told to frighten hatchlings. He looked at it and saw the other side of the same machine the girl carried, a thing built only for the surviving and holding, given no second face, no crew to walk down toward, no order to stand down until a stranger's hand on its plate finally gave it one. It was combat class too. The word was true of it. And the word had been true of her, the same word, and the whole distance between the two of them was not in the word at all. It was in whether anyone had ever come to tell you that you were allowed to stop. You held the ground, Oruvesh said to it quietly, alone in the vault, because a girl had taught him that you did not lie to the frightened thing and that everything that holds a line in the dark is frightened in its way. She wasn't wrong to tell you that. You did, longer than anyone could have asked. The war form did not move. He had not expected it to. He went back up, and did not go down again, but he made sure in the years that followed that its field was never once allowed to brown, that whatever else the station argued about, the thing in the box was left to its rest. Wren Halliday left on the 10th day. There was a relief ship bound in the right direction, and her crew was well enough to travel, and she was as well as a girl gets who has been opened along the side by a warform's blade, and healed it in 10 days through nothing but the machinery the galaxy tells stories about. Oruvesh cleared her himself, ran the last of the batteries, and stood a long moment at the readout, the marrow that still saturated the instrument, the repair agent standing there calm garrison, the reflex arc so short the sensor still doubted it. All of it exactly as it had been the first afternoon, every horror, every marvel, one machine, one job. At the bottom of the profile, where 40 years of habit told him to write his reconstructor's note, he read the one he'd written on the first day. The registry measures capacity. It does not measure use. He looked at it for a while. Then he did something he had never once done in 40 years. He amended his own note, because the girl had taught him the note was still standing on the teeth. He wrote beneath it, correction, capacity and use are one machine. The machine's purpose is survival, hers and everyone's behind her. Combat is only what that machine looks like from the wrong side. I stood on the wrong side for one afternoon and nearly killed the patient who saved the station. Successor reconstructors, do not repeat my afternoon. Read the whole animal. O.V. Talleth. The night before she left, Wren asked to be taken down to the vault. Oruvesh had not expected it, and his first instinct was to refuse. She was 10 days out from a wound that should have killed her, and the thing in the box was the thing that had made the wound. But he had learned by then that refusing Wren Halliday anything was a way of finding out how she got it done without you. So he took her down himself, slowly, the two of them alone in the lift, her hand resting light on the rail and her burned face turned toward the descending numbers. And Kessal met them at the vault door because Kessal met anyone who came near the vault now. And the warden looked at the girl and looked at the door and did not ask why, because he had been down there himself, alone, more than once, for reasons he could not have defended in any tribunal either. You don't have to come in, Wren told him, but you can if you want. I think maybe you'll want to. They went in. The warform stood in its ring in the amber light, exactly where it had stood since the night the field set, holding its small circle of ground, blade limbs quiet, blunt eyeless head turning a few degrees to track them as they came in, not the tracking of a thing hunting, Oruvesh saw now, but the tracking of a sentry, a thing that watches a perimeter because watching a perimeter is the only thing it has ever been for. It did not stir against the field. It did not test the walls. It simply held, the way it had held for 8 years asleep and would hold now awake, and there was something in its stillness that Oruvesh had not been able to name the first night and could name now, because a girl had taught him the word for it. It was at rest. As much rest as a thing built without the part that rests could ever come to. She had told it was allowed to stop, and it had stopped as far as its making would let it, and it was standing its last ground in the quiet, waiting for an order that this time it had been told would never need to come. Ren walked up to the edge of the ring. Close, but not foolish. She had no death wish. She never had. The whole machinery of her was against it. Close enough that the warform's head came around fully to her. Close enough that the two of them faced each other across the bright boundary of the field. The small-heeled girl and the 4 meters of orphaned war. The two things on the station that shared a word. "Hey," she said to it, soft, the same voice she'd used in the ring. "It's me. I'm the one who told you to stand down. I came to see how you were holding up." She studied it. "You held, course you did. That's what we do, you and me. We hold." She was quiet a moment. "I'm leaving tomorrow, and I didn't want to leave without coming down because I've been thinking about you the whole 10 days I've been up there mending, and I figured out the thing I got wrong." Oruvesh went still by the door. Kesal went still beside him. "I told you the war was over," Ren said to the war form. "And that was true. Your war, the one they built you for, that one's been over so long the people who started it are dust. But I said it like over meant you were finished. Like standing down meant there was nothing left for you." She shook her head slowly. "That was wrong. That was me still thinking of you as just the fighting. There's a whole other thing you're for, same as me, and nobody ever let you find out because they only ever pointed you at battlefields. You're not just for holding ground against an enemy. You're for holding ground, full stop. For being the thing that doesn't move when everything else is coming apart. For being the still place people can put their backs against." She lifted her unbroken hand and laid it flat against the field, and the field held it a hand's breadth from the grown plate where she'd touched it in the ring. "So here's a better order than the one I gave you. Don't just stand down, soldier. Stand watch. This station's got 10,000 souls and a warden who checks your field every shift and a doctor who understands you now. Hold this ground. Not against them, for them. Be the still thing at the bottom of the station that never once comes apart. That's a thing worth holding a line for. That's a thing you can rest inside." The war form did not move. Of course it did not move. It was a made thing behind a killing field, given no voice and no second face, and whatever went on inside the grown machinery of it was closed to every instrument the treaty owned. But Oruvesh watched its blunt head tilt, a degree, toward the small hand pressed against the boundary, the same tilt it had given her the first night when she'd told it could stop. And he would argue with himself about that tilt for the rest of his life too, and never settle it, and be glad he could not. "I don't know if it hears you," Kesal said quietly. "I don't know if there's anything left in there to hear." "Neither do I," Ren said, not taking her eyes off it. "But that's not why you say it, Warden. You don't tell the frightened thing it's allowed to rest because you're sure it'll understand. You say it because it's true, and because nobody ever did, and because the not saying is how 200 years of cruelty happens, one frightened thing at a time that nobody bothered to speak to because they weren't sure it counted." She lowered her hand. "I wasn't sure your ledger counted me as a person for about 4 seconds this afternoon, 10 days ago. Turned out the not being sure was the whole danger. So I'd rather say the true thing to a thing that might not hear it than be the person who decided in advance it wasn't worth the breath." She stepped back from the ring. "Mind it well, Warden. It's standing watch now. Give it the dignity of the job." They rode back up in the lift, the 3 of them, and no one spoke. And when the doors opened, Kesal did a thing his caste did not do. He put a working limb briefly against the girl's shoulder. The barest touch. The gelt gesture for a debt acknowledged that could not be repaid. And then he went back down to check the field one more time, because that was his ground now, and he understood at last exactly what he was holding it for. The whole Reconstruction Corps came down to the dock to see her off, which was not a thing the Corps did, and half the wardens came, which was not a thing the wardens did either. And there were dock hands and system techs, and the 9 from the maintenance cell, and 2 of the station medics who had watched from the gallery. And the low, bright dock filled with a quiet crowd of a dozen species who had come to stand near a small, burned girl for reasons most of them could not have put into words. She stood among them looking faintly embarrassed by all of it, the way she'd looked faintly embarrassed by everything that wasn't a job. And she kept trying to turn the attention off herself and onto her crew, onto the warden, onto anyone, and the crowd kept declining to be turned. Kessel came to her first. The warden had brought something, a small dark object cupped in a working limb, and he held it out to her with the awkward formality of a soldier caste attempting a thing his people had no ceremony for. It was a warden's marker, Oruvesh saw, the plain Chitta Gelt carried to show a line held, the thing they gave to their own after the kind of night the station had had. My caste gives these to the ones who held the line, Kessel said. I've never given one to anything that wasn't Gelt. There's no rule for it because no one ever thought it would come up. He pressed it into her unbroken hand. You held a line 4 decks of us couldn't. Take the marker. If anyone asks you what it is, tell them a soldier caste that broke against the genuine article gave it to the one who didn't. Tell them we're slower to learn than we should be, and that we learned. He bowed the folded blade of his head. And tell them I carried you like you were breakable, and that it was the only wise thing I did all day. Wren closed her hand around the marker. You held the drop, she said. That was the wise thing. The carrying was just kind, but I'll take the marker, warden, and I'll tell them a soldier learned. That's a story worth carrying. She looked up at him. Mind the thing in the box. It held its ground longer than anyone should have to. It's earned its rest. Don't let anyone argue it out of it. Its field will never brown while I have a shift, Kessel said, and meant it as the oath it was. Toon came next, and the young apprentice had no ceremony to offer and no marker, only the thing he'd made, which was the amended handling note, printed out in full and rolled and tied, the whole reauthored word she dictated in the arguing room. He gave it to her the way you give someone back a thing that was always theirs. It goes into the treaty registry next cycle, Toon said. Every medical station that carries the ledger. The next one of your kind that lands on a table anywhere in the treaty, the machine will still flag them. It has to. The flag saves your lives, but the machine won't scream anymore. It'll say the true thing, the whole thing. Both sides of the animal. His membranes had color in them now, steady. I wanted you to have the first copy. You wrote it. I just cut the wire. You did more than cut the wire, Wren said, and took the roll, and for a moment held it like the only thing on the dock that mattered to her, which perhaps it was. You went and read 200 years back to where the fear started, and you found the place a decent thing curdled into a cruel one, and you uncurdled it. That's the whole job. That's the actual job, Doctor, not making the frightening thing smaller. Finding where somebody's fear got welded onto somebody else's truth, and cutting it loose. You're going to be better at this than anyone who taught you. Don't let them talk you back onto the teeth side. You know where the whole animal is now. Keep standing there. Then it was Oruvesh, and the old reconstructor found, when the moment came, that 40 years had not prepared him for it any better than they'd prepared him for the flag. I don't have a marker or a registry entry, he said. I have a patient I'm discharging, which is the only ceremony I know. So you're discharged. Your side is healed better than my best work, which is to say your body did most of it and let me watch. The burn will scar faintly. The wrist is sound. You can travel. He stopped because that was the medicine, and the medicine was easy and the rest was not. And I have a thing to say that isn't medicine, if you'll let an old man say it badly. Say it badly, Wren said. Badly's fine. Badly's honest. I spent an afternoon deciding whether you were a monster. Oruvesh said it plainly, because she had taught him that too. My whole life I've stood between the frightening thing and the fragile one. It's the only posture I know. And you walked into my bay as the most frightening reading my instruments ever produced, and I could not for the life of me find the fragile one you were supposed to be threatening, until it turned out the fragile ones were all of us, and the frightening thing was the only one in the building willing to bleed for us. He shook his head slowly. You told me on the first day to hold onto the part of me that wanted the machine to be wrong, the decent part. You said I'd need it when everyone else stopped wanting the same thing. I want you to know I held on to it. It's the reason I followed you down. It's the reason there was medicine waiting when you came out of that ring. You gave me the instruction for keeping you alive before either of us knew you'd need it. His 4 hands were still, all of them, for once entirely still. Thank you. For the station. For the crew. For teaching an old machine reader that the machine only ever shows you one side of anything, and that the other side is the whole reason to keep reading. Ren was quiet for a moment. The doc was quiet with her. You want to know the thing I'll carry off this station, she said. It's not the monster. I've walked toward worse and I'll walk toward worse again. That's just the machine doing its job. It's you. It's a doctor who wanted his own instrument to be wrong so a small hurt creature could just be small and hurt. That's the rarest thing I've met out here, doctor. Rarer than my kind. Rarer than the thing in the box. A whole galaxy full of people who read the alarm and reach for the freezer. And then one who reads the alarm and hopes with everything he's got, that the alarm is lying, because the alternative is that the frightened creature in front of him is something he has to be afraid of. She held his gaze. Don't ever lose that. It's worth more than all my bones put together. It's the thing that's actually going to save people, long after everyone's forgotten the night the girl walked the monster down. She went up the ramp with her crew and did not make a speech and did not look back for long, and the relief ship took her, and the plant tenders of the Pharaoh's patients off toward whatever garden needed keeping next, and the low bright dock emptied slowly of the crowd that had come to stand near her, and Oruvesh stood at the viewport a while after everyone else had gone, watching the ship shrink against the daylit curve of the planet the waystation orbited, until it was one more moving point among the traffic, and then not even that. He thought about the first 4 heartbeats, the routine intake column, the most boring machine on the station, the one that had never once been wrong and never once been loud, going, and going, climbing past the top of everything he owned. He had assumed, in the incurious way one assumes things about a machine, that a loud instrument meant a dangerous patient. It had taken a girl who tended plants 10 days and a hull's worth of her own blood to teach him the thing his 40 years had missed, that the instrument had been perfectly accurate and perfectly mute about the only thing that mattered, and that the fear he'd heard in its climbing had not been in the machine at all. He had brought the fear himself. Everyone had. They had hung it on a true reading and called it the reading's fault. The station went back to being a station. The lower decks were repaired. The wardens buried their 4 with the plain, hard ceremony of their caste, and Kessal stood at the head of it and said their names, and afterward went down and checked the specimens field, and checked it every shift he worked for the rest of his years, and it never once browned. Toon's reauthored handling note went into the treaty registry the next cycle, cut loose at last from the security cross-reference that had welded 200 years of fear onto a founder's act of care, and it began, quietly, without ceremony, to change the 4 seconds in which frightened rooms all across the treaty met the least dangerous people any of them would ever meet. Oruvesh knew the note had done its work the day the next one came. It was months later. A young human off a survey tender with a crushed leg, brought in fast, gray and hurting, and like the first one, like all of them, worried out loud about her crew before she was worried about herself. Oruvesh ran the intake column out of 41 years of habit, and the ledger climbed the way it had climbed for Ren Halliday, saturated the same instruments, hung the same word on the same wall. Handling class, combat. Confidence rising. But the corridor stayed quiet. No slow tone dressed as a summons. No wardens at the lock. Because the wire was cut and the security registry was no longer told, and the medical registry simply did the thing the founders had meant it to do 200 years ago and had forgotten how. It posted the whole reading. The true thing. both sides of the animal. This patient's body is built to survive what would kill you. Dose it accordingly. And be aware the same body that frightens the instrument is, in every case on record, the last thing standing between you and the danger. Handle with care, not because it is dangerous to you. The new apprentice at Oruvesh's side Toon had his own bay now. 2 decks up, read the climbing flag and went pale at the edges the way the young ones did, and reached, out of an instinct the core had not yet trained out of him, toward the standard doses that would have killed her. "No," Oruvesh said, and put a steady hand over the young ones. "Read the wall, all of it, not the first line. What does the machine actually say?" The apprentice read the wall, all of it. "It says," the apprentice said slowly, "handle with care, because she's the last thing standing between us and the danger." "That's right." Oruvesh took up the fresh sampling column and turned to the gray, hurting, worried girl on his table, and did the thing he had learned to do, which was to look at her, finally, and not at the machine. "Dose her like the class says, not like the medicine. The class is the instruction manual. It always was. We just spent 200 years reading it as a warning." He set his front hands flat and steady on the tray, 41 years of the trick, and let the frightened part of the room settle. "The machine's going to keep screaming that word for every one of her kind that ever lands here. It's not wrong to. The word is true. What changed isn't the word." The girl on the table watched him work with a flat, professional, unhurried interest, reading him the way the first one had, the way all of them did, waiting to see the number on his face and decide what it meant. "It's who's listening," Oruvesh said, "and set to keeping her alive.